Welcome to Expo East 2023, and welcome to the Supplement Symposium. Can everybody hear me okay out there? It's too loud, too soft? So thank you very much for being here. I know it's an early morning, but your time here will be well rewarded, I promise you that. This is the first time we've done a supplement symposium at Expo East to really focus in on the supplement industry, which is a very important part of our natural products industry. Represents about $61 billion, which you're going to hear about later from some of our speakers. We have an excellent lineup today of fantastic speakers that are going to talk about the data, what's going on in Washington, regulatory, and then last but certainly not least, we have our keynote speaker who's winning a special Lifetime Achievement Award, who, if you haven't heard already, is Paul Stamets, who's one of the most famous icons in our industry and has brought mushrooms to a level that they are helping people throughout the world. And you're here to hear more from him as well. So I'm going to be your MC today, and we thank you for your attention. And I'd like to also thank Spins, which I think you can see in the background here. Spins is the data source for our industry. And they provide data that brands use and retailers use and researchers use to make their businesses go better. And they're a fantastic data source. And you're going to hear from one of their executives today to give the industry data, as well as some folks from MBJ. So I'd like to give one hand of applause for our sponsor, Spins. Could we have some acknowledgement for them, please? Thank you. So our first thing we're going to start off with is what's going on in the industry, data-wise. And we do this every year at MBJ, Nutrition Business Journal. And this year, we're honored to have two speakers talking about the data for the industry. We have Scott Dicker from Spins, who I just mentioned. We have Erica Kraft from Nutrition Business Journal, our top analyst there, and Bill Geebler, who runs Nutrition Business Journal. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Scott to the stage to talk about some of the data that's happening in the industry. Scott?
Thank you, Tom. Sorry.
Oh, here.
You guys see it? There we go. Good morning, everybody. Are we moving slides here? Can we see it? Back? All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for waking up early. As Tom mentioned, we're super glad that we're doing this supplement symposium. It's such a big part of the natural products industry, and it's great to see getting its fair share at Expo here. I'm Scott Dicker. Thanks for the introduction, Tom. Real quick, just to go through some of the data that we're going to be talking about today. We look at data through a few different lenses. We get the conventional data through our partnership with Circana, and then proprietary to Spins, we look at the natural channel, where a lot of the innovation happens first, as well as some of the specialty. You'll hear more about the data as the symposium continues. I got a lot of slides, so we're just going to keep moving forward on some of the Spins slides. The product intelligence that's layered on, this gives us the actionable insights into what the trends are today and the best look at what's coming in the future. So this is things from the product size, the category, down to the functional ingredient. Is there protein added? Is it plant protein? Is it pea protein? Different sweeteners, and also things like devised attributes such as, does this product follow the ketogenic diet? Does it follow a plant-based diet? And through this, we can really see what the trends are in the industry. And so let's take a look. When we take a look at the categories of what's going on here, you see that there's 5 categories that are showing growth. It's continuing to see performance nutrition and sports nutrition really as the main growth drivers, so both protein supplements and then performance nutrition up over 30%, continuing to be the top performing category for the past 2 years and going strong for a third year. We're also seeing growth in things like probiotics, homeopathics, and superfoods, mostly green powders in the superfoods. But if you look a step further, we take a look at, the sales are up. We know that inflation has had a big impact throughout the store, not just in the supplement space. We see that a lot of the growth in the categories is driven by price increase. So we wanted to show you here, every category really other than those 2 sports nutrition categories is down in units. So the growth is actually caused by the price increase. But really we want to focus on a few things. One, that the price increases in all these supplement categories is typically less than we've seen in food and beverage. And also, for something like performance nutrition, we said that's the highest growth category. It also had one of the lowest rates of price increase, so only 1.7% price increase. So it's pretty amazing that the price has been able to hold steady, and we've seen this level of growth. When we take a look at the health focuses throughout the entire department that are driving sales, we see, no surprise based on the category data, things like performance and hydration. But then some of the other health focuses that are showing things like digestive health, eye health, that's a big one. Detox is becoming big again, and reproductive care. Looking at the functional ingredients, so it's not all about sports nutrition. So we wanted to pull out those categories and see what functional ingredients are driving growth. So you see things like psyllium. Psyllium, fibers becoming big, a lot of prebiotics, digestive health is becoming popular again. Ashwagandha still maintaining a growth. The growth is much less than we saw a few years ago when it was the top performing functional ingredient. But we see that it's maintained that level of success and is actually starting to have some steady growth as well. MSM is one that I'm interested in. It's been long used as a joint health supplement. We're seeing it now used for skincare as well, some of this beauty from within trend. That's been big. Beetroot as well. This comes from some of the sports nutrition world as a nitrate, but we're seeing renewed success as it's positioned as a blood pressure support product, which I think is a big opportunity for both beetroot and other vasodilator supplements as well. Some of the other categories that we look at that we haven't looked at in a while, I just want to take a little deeper dive at the subcategory level. You see letter vitamins are actually all down. Minerals are up in the vitamins and minerals category. A lot of this, I think, has to do with, over the past few years, people have really stocked their pantry. And as we all know, a lot of people don't always remember to take their vitamins every morning. So I think people's pantries are kind of full. And then we look at digestive health. We see, again, fiber is really the leading driver there, but probiotics are doing well. Real quick, who takes fiber or probiotics out there? We see here? All right, these are supplement people. Who bought multivitamins in the past year and hasn't taken them? No? All right, we'll see if we're on trend here. Homeopathic, the formulas and the singles are doing well. Where they're declining are in the topicals and the children's. Throughout the year at NBJ, at a variety of other shows, one of the big topics has been women's health. We've seen a lot of innovation. The Nexty winner for East and the Nexty winner for West were both supplements that had to do with women's health. So we wanted to take a deeper dive into what's going on with the trend. Actually, you see that women's health pulls from all different categories. So you go from like your multivitamin that's women's positioned all the way to specific women's condition supplements. And you see that pulling from all these categories, the overall women's health is actually down 2%. But where we're seeing growth is in digestive health, reproductive health, which is interesting because that used to be a very male-dominated category. And menopause is actually down 9%. But we're seeing like trends on Google searches, social media searches, and a lot of D2C brands really are having strong presences in that. And so I expect by the time we talk at Expo West, we're going to see a turnaround in positive growth for menopause, perimenopause products. Some of the things that are driving growth in women's health are, again, products that are positioned for women that are in traditional categories, so things like probiotics, fat burners. There's also things that are for specific women's issues. So there's the sunflower lecithin, helping nursing mothers. And then also, I love this, the name of I didn't think I'd be at Expo West talking about Happy Hoo-Ha product, but we're seeing a lot of the reproductive health products driving growth as well. When we talk about beauty from within, and we lump it in a little bit with the women's health because they're the main consumers for the beauty products, you're seeing a big growth, driven by a lot of social media trends. But did I get a lot louder all of a sudden? Yeah? All So like things like greens powders, magnesium's another one that went viral on social media. There's this idea of like the beauty sleep, so tying sleep into beauty products. So it's not all just hair, skin, and nails products. We're tying these other wellness, and this is a trend that we've seen in other categories where we're seeing this total health span and wellness really driving a lot of the growth. One of the things that we track, a few years ago, chlorophyll water became really big. It was hyped on TikTok as a skin detox product. And so we saw sales jump up over 160% that year. But this is a great case study as we look at how long a social media trend lasts. So we saw it maintain that growth for 2 years, and now we're starting to see it come down. But it's still well above where it started. So the power of going viral on social media, really has lasting impact on sales here. And I know, Jim, it's only because you're out of stock, right? And now when we go to sports nutrition, my favorite category, we see that growth, this has, again, been the top growing category 2 years in a row, will be 3 years in a row as soon as we get to the end of this year. You see growth for hydration, pre-workouts, creatine, which was my pick to be the ingredient of the year. It's still holding strong. We'll get a little more to that. But people are trying to be healthy. There's this idea flipped to health span rather than lifespan. So people are trying to stay active longer and moving towards performance nutrition. Hydration, you think of it as, we were looking at seasonality, wondering if like in the summer months people were using hydration more, and that turned out to be true. So that's people feeling like they're dehydrated more in the hot weather. We also know that based on some of our consumer data, that younger millennials are over-indexing using these products. A lot of them are using it as hangover remedies as well. So just always something to think about, what are different uses for your products. Creatine, as I mentioned, this was one of our picks to be a top ingredient of the year. It's continuing on that track. We are currently where we were last year. We are almost double where we were, and we're projected to over double the sales by the end of the year. So as we continue this trend, creatine remains an ingredient that we think is going to drive growth, both in the sports nutrition and beyond. And so one of the reasons tying a lot of these trends together is that we've seen this be much more inclusive to women. Creatine, sports nutrition in general, and creatine as a specific ingredient has been really tied to young men in the gym. But lately we've been seeing a lot of female influencers on social media touting that they use creatine, really removing some of the stigma around that it will make you bulky. And that's one of the reasons that we're seeing this explosive growth, because the target market has pretty much doubled on it. We're also seeing new research that can take creatine out of the gym and into the office, into the homes, through things like cognitive health. And so these new health focuses for a well-studied, well-established ingredient are causing this to continue to grow for the health focus. Also, I love this creatine product called Peach Perfect, obviously targeted towards women. I'm not aware that you can tell creatine where to add muscle on your body, but great advertising there. So some other things that I'm looking out for as we end this year and go into next year. We always look at the natural channel as where the innovation occurs first. So I was looking at what products have a greater than 70% market share in the natural channel and are growing as things to look out. So things like saffron, we know mood support is still big. People are looking for mood across food and beverage as well as supplements. Algae, as we look at for vegan omega-3s, inositol, and then barberry or berberine, that's been growing at 75%. If you're wondering why, it was touted as nature's Ozempic. So if everyone's familiar with that, that's the new weight loss drug. We know that pharma has entered the weight loss category. And so what we did is we tracked it once it started to go viral, and we tracked the sales of it, and you see that in a few weeks span, it's really shot up in sales. And so these sales are continuing to go up, as a blood sugar support, and then ultimately as a weight loss product. One of the other things, we see that gut health is still trending. A lot of people are looking at gut talk in 2022 had 5 billion views on Twitter, gut talk alone. So it goes to show you that people are looking for it. A lot of this was for probiotics reducing bloating, recommendations from social media professionals, and then again, feminine health. So a key theme, this is one of the reasons we think that the women's supplements are going to keep going up. Just another example, when we track things and they go viral, there was a TikTok trend that if you took a prebiotic soda, Poppy, and one of the Ali probiotic gummies together, you would lose 7 pounds in 7 days, which sounds terrific. And so we tracked actually the sales, and in a single week, the brands went up 24 and 37% respectively. So I'm not going to have to mention if that's efficacious or not, but again, it shows that people are being influenced and having major impacts both on specific brands as well as categories as a whole. And then finally, I know the reason a lot of people are here is to hear a lot of talk about mushrooms in products. And we continue to see mushrooms driving a lot of sales across all supplement categories and also into food categories. You really know that a product has made it when it goes from a functional supplement into functional beverage, which we're seeing mushrooms into different food categories. So I'm sure on the show floor here, you're going to find a whole bunch of snacks that have mushrooms in it. People are used to seeing it now, and there's a big opportunity to continue to grow. I think we're just at the surface for that. And so I know that was a lot of info for early in the morning. Thank you very much. And with that, I will hand it back to Tom and to Bill and Erica.
Thank you, Scott. Great job.
Thank
you very much. Thank you. Isn't that great? Let's give him a bigger hand than that. That's a lot of great data, right? Thank you. I know it's early, and again, thank you for getting up so early. So I didn't really formally introduce myself, but back in August of 1996, which makes me pretty old, I founded Nutrition Business Journal, and I think I came to Expo East that year. It's been a great journey in the industry. I run the MBJ Summit with New Hope. I sold the MBJ to New Hope and Informa, so I'm still sort of part of the extended family, and they allow me sometimes to get up here and get on stage. So with that, I'd like to introduce the person who took over the helm of MBJ, Nutrition Business Journal, which is sort of the Bible of the nutrition industry, keeps track of all the data, the market trends. Bill Geebler, who runs MBJ, and Erica Kraft, who runs all the data and the analysis behind that State of the Supplement report. How many of you have heard of the State of the Supplement report that MBJ puts out? How many of you have it? You should have it. Thank you for being here. Bill? Erica?
Thank you. Is that the clicker or is this the clicker? Thank you. Good morning. Good to see you all here. There's a bright light out there, but I know you're there. Really great to be here. We've got a lot to go over, so we'll just go right into it. As he said, I'm Bill Geebler, Content and Insights Director at NBJ. And good to hear what Scott said, and it's always very validating. We're going to say a lot of similar things. What NBJ does, I like to say that we do the what, the where, and the why of particularly the supplements industry. And the what is what's selling. We just heard a lot about that, and there's going to be a lot of overlap. We talk about where it's selling, and we talk about why it's selling. With our condition-specific report, we really get into why consumers are buying each ingredient and break it down across the different conditions. So let's see here. Let's start with a high-level market overview. Supplements. So, who's been here for 3 or 4 years? If you have, you've been on a wild ride. It's been a crazy time. 2020, the industry saw the highest growth we've ever seen since what Tom said in 1996. The highest growth NBJ has ever recorded happened in 2020. Not a big surprise, but then what happened is by 2022, we were seeing the lowest growth we have ever recorded. So we had a swing from the highest to the lowest in just 2 years. Strong growth in the year in between in 2021, and then it plummeted basically to 1.9% growth, not even inflation really, for 2022. And now we're climbing back up, and we're kind of plodding along in the low single digits to the end of the forecast period. Looking at that compared to what we said in 2019, here's what we said in 2019. If you look at, which is it? Let's see, the blue line is the growth line. So you see the gold line doing the same dance we just talked about. If you look at those teal bars, you see what we're now saying compared to what we said before. So look at that. We're actually still coming out ahead. But last year we were up here saying the industry had a sustained growth of about 3 billion. We've cut that in half now. It's more like 1.5 billion. The economy came and kind of took back some of what COVID gave the industry. Still though, without that COVID boost, the economic downplay would have probably just ended up in negative growth instead of low positive growth. So over to you, Erica.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Now we're going to get into some surprises that we saw. So I want to start off with going on channel dynamics, and we're going to start off with e-commerce growth. So obviously we can see in 2020 saw quite a big spike at about 87%. And you know, of course we're going to expect some normalization in the market to happen, but what we didn't quite expect was for it to happen so abruptly, right? So we see growth in 2022 at about 5.7%. And still will contain or remain healthy into the forecasted years. But what I thought was interesting was even before the pandemic, e-commerce was one of the fastest growing channels, and in 2022 it actually was not. So, and we'll kind of go into that a little bit further. And then on the right we just show e-commerce growth versus total supplement growth, still well above industry average. And then going into another surprise, so this is herbs and botanicals, and what I really like how MBJ visualizes this data is the pre-COVID versus current estimates. And what I want to focus on here is the 2020 and 2021 totals. So we see that COVID really brought us a good boost in that category, but unfortunately in 2022 we saw negative 1.9% growth, which was pretty harsh, right? We weren't really expecting it to be as low as that.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately it did go a little bit negative, but into the future we do expect it to go back into healthy territory. And then again, as well as Scott, this is my favorite category. So the combined sports nutrition and weight management category. So we saw huge, also historic growth in 2021. So a year delayed compared to the other categories of a COVID boost, but we saw about 22% growth in 2021, and it still remains pretty high around that 8 to 9% growth range. But what I thought was interesting here was between 2022 and a forecasted 2026, it's going to add almost $28 billion in the category and grow at about 44% and reach about almost $91 billion in 2026. So lots of product innovation, lots of room to grow, so it's going to be really interesting to see.
It's an interesting category. When you see that spike looks the same as the other spike, but if you look closely, it happened a year later. We actually saw a dip in 2020, and then it spiked up in 2021, and then it's moving on that way. So there's some surprises, bright spots, and opportunities. Let's talk a little bit about that. First, now we go to the where is it selling. Another something of a surprise, mass market is really doing well. It's a growth category. You can see that not only is 2022 higher on that gold line than it was in 2021, but it's higher than it was in 2019, just a little bit. Not dramatic, but while other channels are coming down, mass market is going up. And part of our story for why this is happening is the economy. We've surveyed consumers. We know what are consumers doing about their supplements during tough economic times. Are they stopping taking them? For the most part, no. Are they leaving the premium brands and moving to value brands and store brands? Yes. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing growth in mass market. We continue to see shrinking in natural and specialty. It's interesting to see it's the same number, that 5.7, that mass market lifted to 5.7 while we're talking about e-commerce plummeting to 5.7. Practitioner channel is another one, and it's kind of the opposite story. The practitioner channel, granted it's a much smaller channel, so that 7.6% growth, stronger growth rate, not more dollars. But seeing the practitioner, a lot of strength in the practitioner channel. So even while consumers are, when they're buying on their own, they're going to value brands, they also value the advice of practitioners. So these are premium products, and we're seeing great growth in this premium channel. So when you see the chart on the right, you see now you see how that's spiking, and let's see, we're the gold line, and so that green line is the overall industry, and the gold line is quite a bit above it with higher growth.
And again, we would be remiss if we didn't put a slide on mushrooms. So starting into the ingredient-specific data. So we want to show here, what I like to focus on is the sales, right? So if we look at 2018, it started at about a $40 million category, and into 2026, we expect it to go to about $240 million. So quite a lot of growth, and we expect it to grow 6 times. And in 2020, of course, about 60% growth. We saw a really big spike, and it normalizes, of course, but from 2022 into 2026, it remains into double-digit growth. So lots of room for market expansion. And then, of course, again, ashwagandha. So we have this ingredient in here. Same thing. I like to show that in 2018, it went from 100 million to 300 million in 2022, so about a 200% growth. Pretty significant, and especially with what I like to think about is the condition-specific piece to this, right? So we see ashwagandha, mood and mental health, but what's interesting is we're starting to see the ingredient in other conditions like women's health. So it'll be really interesting to see where that ingredient goes. Lots of more room for growth. Into the forecasted future, it'll be about 7 to 9%.
Yeah, so there we've talked a little bit about the what. That's what's selling, mushrooms, ashwagandha. That's not the whole story. We're just giving you a little peek here. Before that, I talked about the where it's selling, e-commerce, or Erica talked about e-commerce, mass market and practitioner channel. So now let's talk about the why. The why. The why is it selling? And so I'll keep going. Can you hear me okay? Is it as distracting out there as it is up here? Okay, why are people buying this stuff? This slide is from some consumer research we did. So this is what the consumers are saying. Everything we've shown you so far is what they're doing, what they're actually doing, where they're buying, and but this is what consumers say they're doing. And if you, aside from general health, and there's those multis that Scott was talking about, but stress management is the number 2 reason people are the top health concerns. Not necessarily why they're taking supplements, but these are the things that consumers are thinking about. Stress management, and then you've got energy or lack of energy. You've got weight management, which Scott talked about quite a bit. And then right after that, you've got sleep, which is closely related to energy. And then right after that, you've got mood and mental health, which is very similar to stress. In other words, a lot of the same conditions like Erica talked about with ashwagandha. So now when we go to our market sizing numbers, we see it there's that spike again. It's a familiar spike on every one of these, but different growth rates. Higher growth rates here than the overall industry, and just seeing a lot of strength, adding 200 million to the mood and mental health category between last year and 2026. So that's a really strong. That's one of those good news, bad news stories. I mean, it's only good news if you're selling in the category. It's bad news if you're living in the world. But we go, and then one other area we want to focus on, women's health. Scott talked about that too. It's always great. We didn't connect before much on this, and it's always interesting to see we're telling the same story, and it makes sense because it is the same story. A lot of focus on women's health. We're putting out a women's health report in just a few weeks for the first time, focusing only on women's health. We're seeing a lot of product development in not just menopause and prenatal, but also more in things like PMS and perimenopause, and really branching out in that area. So strong growth shown here. On the left there, that's women's general health, and on the right, those are numbers, growth and such for menopause supplements.
All right, and I'm here to summarize and round us out for the discussion this morning. So overall, right, we talked about the harsh normalization that brought growth to a halt in 2022, but thankfully the supplement industry is resilient and we see growth to go back to healthy levels in 2023 and beyond. And supplements are going mainstream and accelerated with the impacts of the economy, right? Like Bill was talking about with mass market, consumers are looking for these value brands, and rather than stopping taking supplements completely, they're looking for and doing different purchasing habits and choosing more value products. And then modern conditions providing new opportunities. We're seeing growth in a lot of different conditions like we talked about this morning, and it's really going to be Interesting to see all of the product innovation and to see where that goes, which we'll be tracking. And then overall, I like to end on a positive note. So supplement industry is healthy and remains a COVID-driven boost. We saw so many consumers enter this market, and there's still quite a bit of demand for condition-specific supplements, and they want to solve all of their solutions, and we're tracking it here and we'll help them. So some of the data that we presented here today, here are some of the reports that it came from. Like Bill mentioned, we're doing the Women's Health Report in a couple weeks, so we're really excited about that. And we have a booth here, so if you guys have any questions on those reports or for anything that we presented here today, you can come by there or you can talk to us after this. But other than that, thank you guys for coming here this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Great job. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're almost on time, and thank you for your attention this morning. We have our next session, which is going to be sort of a retail leadership panel. I mean, the reason Expo East exists, obviously, is for the retailers to learn what's going on in the industry, whether it's food brands or beverage brands or supplement brands. So we put together a great panel. Thank you to Jen Taylor and the New Hope team to talk about retailer strategies, not navigating quality and channel strategy, and what's going on with the consumer. So to lead that panel today, we have Rick Polito. I don't know if all you probably know Rick Polito. He's editor-in-chief of MBJ. He's going to moderate, and he'll be talking with today Jim Emmy, the CEO of Now Foods, one of the biggest brands in our space, Jeff Gayton from the Vitamin Shop, Jack Gayton, excuse me, from the Vitamin Shop, and Sherry Zhang from Geno Palette. So we'd like to bring all those panelists up and Rick Polito to moderate. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. Hey, Jack. Sorry. How you doing? Sherry, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for down here. I was worried about the room being a little bit empty and echoey, but we're just going to go with echoey. We don't have to worry about the empty. So we're here to talk about, I was been thinking, we had a little huddle last week, that are we in the post-pandemic or the post-pandemic, or is this kind of a pandemic intermission? I was talking to Jim just yesterday about some, bubbling up of demand and ingredients, that he can track it better than the CDC. So what I've been thinking about a lot is, and we spoke about this, is during the pandemic, which drove so much sales, there was an urgency around nutrition for people. There was no option from pharma or really recommendations besides wash your hands and wear a mask, and people were turning with this urgency to supplements. And then now there's a challenge, and we see that the growth that was shown up there as it dipped down, of how do we create supplements to be a priority without that urgency. So that's what I wanted to start with talking about. And I'm wondering, Jack, what are you seeing that in the way people are interacting with Vitamin Shop? Jack is merchandise manager for Vitamin Shop.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing, I think, to answer your question, it's definitely, in my mind, post-pandemic, because we've seen these dramatic rises and falls for both areas of our business, vitamins and supplements, and then also sports nutrition. So where we saw these dramatic rises and these major decreases, it's really more of a return to normalcy now. We're still seeing really good growth coming from our sports nutrition business, although it's definitely leveled off a little bit in 2023 compared to 2022. And we're really seeing people trying to just get back to like a regular routine and be a little bit more focused on their everyday lives. I still feel like they're putting a lot of priority into wellness. Obviously not at that frenetic pace coming out of COVID. There's less fear now. It's more about, COVID's still around, it's not going anywhere. How do I maintain a wellness regimen and stay on top of my supplementation, but not quite with that same level of urgency. And we're definitely seeing a real shift into sports nutrition that's occurred. Historically we were, 55% VMS, 45% sports, and post-COVID, really starting in 2021, it's totally flipped, where we're doing 55% of our sales really coming from sports nutrition, and closer to the 45 coming from VMS. So, and we think that's going to continue to grow. It may level off a bit, but people are kind of settling into this new normal.
Is there something that brands or a channel strategy and the rest can do about that, like moving people from that urgency into priority, or is that as like a natural evolution that consumers just follow?
I think it's a bit of a natural evolution, but I do think, by staying on top of the trends and the things that we're seeing and making sure that you take the right actions when you see these hot things coming up, whether it's magnesium glycinate is exploding for us, and we're seeing that as something that's probably going to stick around for a while, or things like berberine, which seems to be kind of driven a little bit by what's going on with like Ozempic and things like that. I think if the brands can stay on top of those trends and go to where the customer's looking to go, they'll have a good amount of success. And I really think we're kind of really want to start to focus a lot more back on, innovation. What's new, what's exciting, what's going to drive footfalls to the vitamin shop and to retail in general.
Well, Jim, do you think there's a different relationship between consumers and brands like your own now that you're doing anything about, that you'll be able to shape with this urgency priority transition?
Well, I think it is, and first of all, I agree with all the data that was shared today, and it was really good data. What we are seeing is that consumers have not stepped out of the arena post-COVID. We still see demand. We see global demand. We're sold in, 96 countries now. And in some areas, the region is up as high as 25 or 30%. In a post-COVID environment, I think Jack's description of the consumers are no longer afraid so much than they are being proactive of what their health are. I also think the global economy has a lot to do with the shift to more value brands. We're viewed as a value brand with high quality, and that works very well for us. I wouldn't say we're recession-proof, but I don't hear retailers, either online or brick and mortar, talking as much about recession worries. Everybody's watching inventory, everybody's guarding cash, but the consumers continue to come back to the point that now is still hiring because we can't keep up right now, so it's a good place to be.
Yeah, you were telling me about that. Yeah. Now I want to move to Sherry, but before we start talking, I need you to explain what your company is. It's personalized nutrition, it's DNA-based. Give us a little bit of that, and then I want to talk about how you see who are the customers coming to you with that sort of priority. I need to maintain my health. It's not reactionary like we had that was driving sales during the worst of COVID, but there's something there within that whole priority. Who are the people who are coming to you? So tell us a little bit about your company first.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Rick. And so my company is called GenoPalette. It's bringing the deliciousness combined with your genomic power for your personal optimal health over the long term. And we are a U.S. leading nutrigenomics platform. We provide highly tailored nutritional recommendations and products based on, as you said, people's DNA patterns, which is very unique, especially when you combine that with non-genetic factors. We focus, my background is obesity genetics and epigenetics. I study obesity metabolic syndrome for over a decade. So we know the 30% to 70% of a metabolic health outcomes is determined by genetic factors. But yet we don't have enough access to that information for self-care at home or healthcare in a hospital clinic. So that's the original vision of GenoPalette. I founded GenoPalette to deliver, to help address that access issues. So with that said, we are proudly servicing a growing clientele of more than 170,000 individuals. So we have enough data points to look at why people are interested in personalization. What else can we bring to their life to help them continue, managing their health journey into wellness, so that before the health onsets, the disease onsets are happening. So preventative care versus health care, which is being talked a lot about. The trend that we've seen during post-pandemic is people are more curious about why this ingredient is good for me. Can you contextualize the usage, quantity, quality of what you give me as whether recommendations or products, so that it become very practical and useful for me and sustainable for the long run. I think retailers and brands that want to stand out in this world and time going forward needs to really have a strategy to manage wellness before the disease or when the disease is happening through nutrition. That's what our job is.
Well, I was thinking about, and Bill and Erica were up here a moment ago talking about practitioners being this, really strong growing category right now, and our channel right now. And the people who come into the practitioner, the consumers who show up there many times with a sort of a crisis or a driving need that gets them in there. Is there something like that that's going on with personalized that gets them over to, I need to get to this next level of the wellness? What brings your people in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people, personalization, there's a one tier where everybody can easily access, potentially is through a survey, right? Your age, your gender, and where you are and what you have access to, and exercise, cadency and fruit and vegetable, which is a good index for how healthy lifestyle they are really doing. But again, as I said, we're lacking the access to your genetic blueprint, which is so important for us to understanding how your genes interacting with the environment to drive the outcomes. Like Jack and me, we eat the same food. We're not going to have the same health outcomes. Why we prescribe the same food to everybody? It just doesn't make sense. So I think people start to realizing that also the COVID educated everybody so well about how important it is to keep your metabolic health really solid, right? Because that will increase your capability of death, capability of acquiring and contracting the viruses and infections. So I think that really tee up a nice stage for wellness providers, and people want to. What we can share is people are willing to pay premium for the personalization if you can demonstrate this is truly evidence-based offer.
Okay. Well, Jack, when you guys look at personalization and it's, the size of Vitamin Shop, you're not talking to every single consumer and not in the same way. What does retail like Vitamin Shop look at when they see personalization coming? Is there an access point for you to grab onto?
I think it's a great point because there's no one solution for every customer or person, right? So what may work for one doesn't work for the other. As far as the access points, I think that's one of the advantages we have at the Vitamin Shop is we have those health enthusiasts, the people in our stores who are so focused on that person walking in. It's less about what they're, it's not about what we're trying to sell, what we have on the shelf. It's about what's the solution that's right for you. And we have so many different things that we can help the customer with. So, I think that's a big part of it. And I think, like I said, it's, everyone has a different need and a different desire. So it's really just about digging into what they have. But again, that's, I think, one of the great things about what we do at the Vitamin Shop.
But you still have, we also saw in those statistics earlier that mass market is doing so much better than what we call natural and specialty, which includes you, that doesn't have that service. So, how do you get those people back in? There's a bunch of people who are more motivated, and we talked about the education aspect of COVID, talking more about what these things mean. How do we get them in the door and getting the kind of service that you can provide?
Well, I think a big part of that is a lot to do with the brands that are out there and, driving that need and desire for the products. And that's why we're so focused on just obsessive compulsive, and when it comes to newness and innovation. We always want to be out in front in specialty, and we want to be kind of like leading the ground in terms of what's coming in. So I think that's critically important. And then it's experience for us too. You're not, to your point, you're not going to have the same experience going to a mass market retailer than you will going to a specialty channel, whether it's a retailer like ourselves in specialty or somebody in natural. It's just a better experience, and I think people still value that. Obviously, whether it's a recession or not, I don't think it really matters. It is what it is right now. And I think customers are obviously focused on price, but I do think they also still want a really good experience. And I think that's something that's really important to the Vitamin Shop, and that's something that we can add.
Well, tell me, Jim, what do you make of that? It's like mass market doing better and actually brick and mortar together doing better in sales growth than e-commerce. What does that tell you about your consumers right now?
Well, one of the interesting points that we have, or we believe is interesting, we're a retailer as well.
Yeah.
Not many brands do that. We have 12 retail stores in the Chicago area and 4 store-within-a stores with a regional chain in the area. And I see many retailers out in the audience, and I still believe that there is a need for consumers going and talking to someone in person. Maybe I'm a little old school on that, but the reality of it is there's a bond and a trust to be able to walk into a retailer and have that happen. Now with the growth of online sales, big box store sales, you tend to lose some of that. You walk into a large chain somewhere, anywhere in the world, you're not going to get a question asked. You're going to run into somebody stocking shelves or what have you, and they're not going to be able to say, gee, I recommend this to support this. So we feel there's still a strong consumer connection for that. Now, granted, the growth of influencers, TikTok, there was a lot of discussion about that by Scott and Bill and Erica. That definitely drives a lot of things, but not everyone absolutely believes everything they're hearing online.
What?
Yeah, I do believe that because I hear it. We do consumer tours through our facilities, and maybe they're regional, maybe they're a senior home coming in, it doesn't matter, but every one of them is curious about what's going on out there. And I think that the consumers are going to find the path of least resistance when it comes to information they can believe in. I've already heard several people, Scott had mentioned the chlorophyll TikTok video and how crazy that was. I mean, chlorophyll from a supply side standpoint is still unavailable in many areas. We make it, it's gone. It's still happening that way. But the reality of it is I've heard several consumers say, well, I tried it and it didn't work. And I ask, okay, why is that? Well, maybe I used it wrong. I need to talk to somebody about that. And I don't offer any help on it too much, but it's just interesting to hear it. It's not statistically sound, it's not solid, but there's a pattern there of behaviors and consumer feedback that we get that's happening. But there's also a lot of confusion out there in consumers right now. And I think that's an opportunity for retailers. I think that's an opportunity for brands. I think it's an opportunity for science-based services. There's a lot in play and a lot of gaps that each and every one of us that are in the industry can help fill.
Well, I was thinking about with natural specialty retail, something that your brand and other brands are seeing too, this counterfeit problem that you discovered and have talked about in the trade press, and some of you heard about this, that Now Foods got a report from a consumer, I believe first, that this label didn't look right, and found on Amazon copies of your products being sold, and some with empty capsules. But it seems to me that there's an opportunity here for natural retailers who are out here, because it's not that we just stock the best brands, we stock the actual brands and the whole chain of custody and the rest. Is there a message that can be delivered to consumers from natural retail, people like Vitamin Shoppe, that say, we're responsible not in just what we carry, but where it comes from?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's this is a problem, economic adulteration, counterfeiting. It's a tale as old as time, right? Yeah. So we encountered it. We had a consumer actually contact us and said, hey, I bought my usual product and it's not a soft gel. What did you guys do? It's always been a soft gel. Well, we looked at it, got it, bought it off of Amazon, and found out that, gee, we've got 13 products out there where the labels were terrible. Clearly, it was not our format. It was dumbed down. So we reported it to the FDA. We reported it, actually opened up a case file with the FBI. State Department was involved because it came out of Nigeria. Who knows what the long chain connection on that, but some were empty, but also there were some of the products, and there was another brand that also had been counterfeited, and we contacted them and let them know. But we also found sildenafil in it, Viagra. There were traces of it. Now, thank goodness, not a whole lot of adverse effects from it, the very, very small amounts, but this can be very dangerous too. And we've all got to take it seriously. This isn't just an intellectual property theft situation. This is a consumer safety and consumer trust situation. Now, I can say the reaction by the FDA and Amazon was much more aggressive when there was an allopathic contaminant in it, an adulterant in it. But when it comes to counterfeiting and such, I have to say a lot of the activity we've encountered and all parties involved are kind of ho-hum. It's like, well, it's not a safety issue, so we're not going to worry about it. Yeah, it's a risk issue. It's more, let's circle our wagons, make sure that the plaintiff's bar isn't going to come after us with a class action lawsuit. And I do believe the credibility that retailers have is to represent, yes, we do control the supply chain, just as you represented, Rick, and just an outstanding opportunity. But let's not forget, this consumer trust is very tenuous. It is not guaranteed at any given time. You see ads on TV for supplements that's going to replace your fruits and vegetable diets, hint, hint of what it is. They got an FDA audit and they had, I believe, 9 483 warnings, 3 of which are there. They're not GMP compliant, and there's a lack of enforcement. So the bottom line is we're not going to get support from the government agencies anytime soon on establishing and supporting this consumer trust. So it's up to us in the industry and the value chain of the industry to make sure that we keep that trust with consumers. Huge opportunity.
Well, Jack, what do you think of that opportunity, specifically to like the counterfeiting and that trust thing? Is there a way to talk about that's not waving a red flag about supplements in general, but saying here's the role of the retailer, here's our relationship with you?
Well, I think our pillars are at the Vitamin Shop: quality, expertise, and innovation, and I think it comes from it's that quality, like what you're getting, because we do have that direct link with the suppliers. We're sending a purchase order directly to that specific brand and getting the product. So I do think we are able to have that to our benefit. I think it's a great point, and I think it's something that we should probably be thinking about is how do we kind of make sure we put it out there to like, hey, the products that you're getting at the Vitamin Shop are from these proper brands. I also think it can go deeper than that too. It's the brands themselves. It's breaking the trust with the customer. It can obviously impact a brand, but it can also impact a retailer. And it takes a long time to get that back when that trust is broken. So that's why I think it's critically important. That's why I know we're so passionate about making sure we understand who the brands are that we work with and what they truly stand for. And obviously we want the hot products, we want the good products, but we also want to make sure that we're working with brands that have the best interest of the customers in mind.
Well, I wanted to talk to Sherry then. The people who are coming to your level, it's a special kind of consumer who's that motivated. Is trust part of the issue for them, you think? Or, are they tired of looking at through brand after brand and then looking for the thing they can trust as the thing that's tuned to them?
Yeah, so we offer 2 sides of product or service. One is information based on your genetic, and we provide recommendations. And that part, similarly to all the nutrients and the ingredients that we put in our bottle, it requires a high level of scrutiny of the evidence and sift through thousands of studies before we can present that true signal to our customers. So in the same principle, we are very, very quality controlled and quality focused, because we have people trust us with your DNA. That's the most private thing, most precious thing you could ever possess and give it out. So we guard it very, very carefully. And Jim talking about trust. It's all about trust. Trust, as you know, it's so easy to break and so hard to grow. So we have a lot of QA/QC on the information side based on genetics, because your disease information, risk for Alzheimer's, everything is all there, right? And on the other side is we are very careful about sourcing our manufacturing, the ingredients, and as everybody here are probably doing that, and make sure it's obey the best practice. And also we personalize, we literally personalize everything into individual capsules based on the genetic and non-genetic information. So it's quite a different process from mass production.
And a very different relationship then.
Yes, very deep. If you make it right, you have a lifetime of a relationship, which is really nice for personalization.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, and I have to talk about the Ozempic age. And I saw that it was Scott showing us the statistic on Burberry only being up 75%. I would have guessed 7,500%. What are you seeing for that Ozempic effect in Vitamin Shop?
We're definitely seeing it for sure, and I think it probably would be higher if we had the inventory that we wanted, because it's been that hot, and it happened so quickly. Berberine, yeah. You know, the spike that we saw in demand, it happened so quickly that it does take a little while for us to catch up to that. And it's one of those things where, you know, I don't know if I don't think this is going away, and I think when we talked last week, we said, from my standpoint, this is one of the biggest. Ozempic and semaglutides and all those things, I think it's something that it doesn't come along very often. And whether people agree with it or not, or the efficacy, it's here to stay, in my opinion. And it's going to have a big impact on the industry. But I think there's ways that, as retailers and as brands, you can start to think, okay, so you know, how do I kind of work within this new world and find these supplements that can either, you know, help to augment or supplement somebody that's on different protocols. So berberine obviously is something that's going to, I think, continue to be hot as people look for a more affordable way to get the similar results. But I think it's also important that we start to think about this new world, and whether it's hormone replacement therapy or semaglutides or things that are going on in some of the clinics. And then from a brand standpoint, how do I, you know, continue to offer value to the customer through, you know, auxiliary items and things that can go along with people on different regimens? Because I think that's where, I feel like that's where a lot of health and wellness is going. We're seeing it, you know, definitely going to stick around.
What about you, Jim? How are your people looking at this weight control, which I always say it's sports nutrition and weight management, we call it, as a category together, which used to be called one thing, because that's half the people who are working out to lose weight and the rest. But how does Now Foods look at all this sort of bubbling up activity around there with Ozempic coming at it?
Well, we ride the wave pretty much. We've had a berberine-based product out for probably about 5 years now. And our approach has been, we looked at the science. There was clinical data to show glucose management support with a combination of other ingredients that included berberine in it. So we've got 1,400 different SKUs. So when something pops, odds are we've already got it in our catalog portfolio. And we haven't jumped on the weight loss bandwagon. With berberine, we try to avoid weight loss because it can be very subjective. We focus on the sport side of things because we believe that there are no magic bullets. You have to have good nutrition, exercise, and by the way, supplement where you need it. And I think that's where the role of Sherry's organization and such can really help build trust and connect the dots on a lot of these things. So no, we're selling a lot of berberine. We're like Jack, you know, we have had trouble keeping it in stock. We've got a steady supply now, so all those who want to buy, contact your Now rep. You'll probably find we've got it there today. So
Or the Vitamin Shop.
Tomorrow will be too late, so move fast. Anyway, but no, I think as an industry and brands and retailers, we have to be very cautious about being too aggressive when these new ideas pop up. I really enjoyed the way Jack described the Ozempic dynamic, and it's here to stay. It's not going away. Just with our medical benefits, we can see that there are many more allopathic practitioners that are prescribing it for weight loss. We believe there are other routes to go, and it's an opportunity for all of us, but let's be very cautious about unsubstantiated claims. I think that's common sense, but I had a dear older friend tell me one time that common sense is a gift, not a given. And something for all of us to remember when we want to go out and tell tall tales.
Well, you heard it here today. Jim told us we can't believe everything we hear online, and there's no magic bullet. Kind of a downer.
You're welcome.
I thought it was going to be so easy. Hey, well, thank you, all of you. I'm going to give up the stage back to Tom. He has Steve Mister back there going to talk about some issues that are facing the industry. But thank you, Jim. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
And thank you, all of you.
Do you have the clicker? You got the clicker? The clicker? The clicker? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Okay. Wasn't that great? Did everybody enjoy that panel? You really have a lot of great leaders there that are talking about what's going on on the retail front, and I learned a lot from listening to that, including this natural Ozempic thing that's happening, which is always risky for the supplement industry because we want to sell more berberine, but we don't want to make false claims. On that note, it's a great segue to our next session, and thank you again for all your attention. I'm going to actually do something a little unorthodox here. I'm going to tell everybody that if you have a good friend or anybody that you know that's at the show, you want to text them now and tell them to come to this rest of this session. Not only are we going to hear from Steve Mister and a few remarks about the summit, but we're going to hear from one of the great leaders in our industry, who's one of the smartest and creators of the category of mushrooms, Paul Stamets. So you don't want to miss Paul Stamets. He's one of the great speakers around the world. He speaks all over in many different factions. So if you want to do a friend a favor, text them. I'm doing social media, yes, right now. Tell them to join us at 9 o'clock for Paul Stamets. So with that, I'd like to open up our next session and introduce my friend and colleague here, Steve Mister. Many of you might know who Steve is. He's the he's the executive chairman and CEO of CRN, which is Council for Responsible Nutrition, one of the trade associations that helps the supplement industry work with Washington, work with lobbyists. They have quite a few members. How many members of CRN are out there? Could I just get some audience participation? Okay, Steve, you need, okay.
It's early. They were all party of us.
A few, okay. So with that, Steve's got a great background running trade associations. He's been there 10 plus years, I believe. How many years, Steve, now?
18.
18 years, okay, so time flies. And he's been a great leader and a great protector of our industry. And behind the scenes, he does a lot to make sure that you as brands can sell your supplement products. So Steve, welcome to the Supplement Symposium.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So Steve, we don't have a ton of time. I mean, I know this is all a little bit truncated this morning, but we had talked earlier last week, and I was texting Steve this morning about what should we cover if we only have 15 minutes, and what are the important topics and what's going on in Washington. So the regulatory situation sometimes is a little dry and hard to understand, but CRN helps to boil it down. So I asked Steve to boil down the key issues that you need to know about from a regulatory standpoint. So my first question, Steve, is what is going on in Washington? I know it's down the East Coast here. That is important to the supplement industry. What's keeping you and your members up at night? And maybe just tell everybody about how many members you have and
Sure.
how influenced you are in the industry. Thanks.
Well, I'm not the founder of CRN. CRN's been around 50 years, but I have been there 18, and it's been an interesting ride for the last 18 years. There's so much going on in Washington. Of course, from the big picture, what keeps me up most right now is the government going to shut down in 10 days or not? That would definitely affect FDA, that would affect inspections, that would affect policy making at FDA. All of that would come to a screeching halt. But then kind of zooming in more to things that absolutely impact this industry. The FDA reorganization that's going on right now, I think has a potential to have a huge impact on this industry. And it may not be one of those things that people are paying attention to, but as a result of some of the problems they had with infant formula and some of the questions on credibility, FDA was under a lot of pressure to do some things to change the structure. So they came out with this new reorganization of the entire food side of FDA. It's supposed to correct the problems on the food side, but the problem is it is short-shifting dietary supplements in the process. about 7 years ago, the industry worked very hard to get an Office of Dietary Supplement Programs established within the agency that would have dedicated resources, dedicated funding, a certain number of full-time staff, FTEs, that would be given to that. This reorganization would essentially do away with that office and fold it into a much bigger office, which means less attention, less priorities, less ability to get the commissioner's attention when there's a problem. And, and I was thinking about Jim's comments about, trying to get the FDA to address some of the counterfeit issues and the adulteration issues. The more you bury our part of FDA, into the bowels of the agency, the harder it is to get resources, staffing, all of that.
So that's sort of behind the scenes. Is it too late to do something about that?
No, absolutely not. They've come out with this proposal. It's interesting. There has been concerns and objections raised at both ends of Congress. So, given the way Washington is these days, when you get very conservative members of Congress writing to FDA saying they're concerned about this reorganization and how it impacts dietary supplements, and then you get people like Senator Blumenthal and Senator Durbin also writing in saying, what are you doing? I think that's starting to get the agency's attention, but we just have to keep the pressure on them that if they're going to do this reorganization, they should not do it on the back of our industry. We need to have consumer confidence and trust for those growth rates that Bill was showing earlier to keep going up. And to do that, you have to have a certain level of FDA attention to the industry.
Got it. Good. Well, I asked a few people what they would want to ask because we don't have time for the audience to ask questions, but I did sort of poll a few people. And we'll switch gears just a little bit here. And then I want to talk about Deshay a little bit because we have a big anniversary coming up. But so we don't run out of time, CBD. Yep. It's something you and I have talked about over the years. I know that people in the audience are interested in like what is really going to happen with CBD. It was one of those bright stars when, 5 years ago it was going to be the biggest thing ever, and then it crashed and burned. And a lot of the reason it hasn't really taken hold is we just don't have a regulatory pathway. Do you see that at all happening? Because I heard in the beginning of the year it might be part of the Farm Bill. Then I heard in the middle of the year it wouldn't be. And then I heard last month it came back again. I know I'm asking you to be a crystal ball here, but do you think we'll get any rationalization for CBD?
I guess I wouldn't put even money on it at this point, but I think we're in a better situation now than we were, say, 6 months ago, because there seems to be a renewed interest in this in Congress. We had the first hearing after, 4.5 years after the Farm Bill passed. We had a hearing this summer on the CBD situation. There was a briefing on Capitol Hill for Hill staff just yesterday. There was no requirement that staff go to that. It was just a briefing for staffers who wanted to attend. CRN was there, we spoke, and we were surprised how many staffers actually showed up. So that means that there is talk about this in their offices, that there is interest. At the end of August, we supplied responses to the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate Health Committee. They asked 29 different questions about the regulation. We laid out a pretty clear pathway on how FDA can regulate CBD as a dietary supplement. We think a lot of what FDA is saying, that they don't have the tools, they don't have the ability that they need to effectively regulate. It's based on the fact that what they would really like is a new center. Just like they have a center for tobacco products, they'd like a center for cannabis products, and that just doesn't make sense. When they have existing regulatory structure that can oversee CBD, it can provide consumers with safe levels, it can provide them with labeling and those kinds of things, they should use what they already have available to them. Particularly when you think about this reorganization and the whole idea is, gee, we don't have enough resources, we need to do more with less, and now they want to create a new center. So I guess I would say, Tom, more likely that something happens than maybe 6 months ago, but I think we still have a long road ahead.
Well, you know my personal opinion on this. I mean, if there's anything that the FDA was designed for, it was to do things like come out with some kind of rationalization or guidelines for CBD, because otherwise you have the whole issue of edibles and CBD and foods and with kids and stuff. So to me, they're just not doing their job. And we talked about that at the summit, and we put one of the FDA guys on the hot seat about that. So it just seems to me that this is an obvious layup for them to do something. It's frustrating. So
it's very frustrating as an industry when you see a market that could be regulated with some guardrails around it and give consumers confidence in it, and it would take off. And it's suffering from neglect because the agency doesn't do anything.
Right. Good. So let's move on to a different topic, which is DSHEA. So as everybody might know, DSHEA was officially the beginning of the real supplement industry, which is back in October of 1994, right?
That's right.
And so we're now approaching a big anniversary, 30 years. And there's always been talk about DSHEA, is it good, is it bad for the industry? Of course, it gives us our guidelines. And then does a sort of a bill like this, or the framework of DSHEA, last forever? I mean, and you've been in Washington, some of these laws, that's why the Constitution can be changed. Is there time for DSHEA reform? And I know that's a huge topic, we don't have time to get into it. So I want to sort of do a subtopic in there, which is what is going on with this whole thing with NAC, NMN, the Drug Preclusion Act, and how can we tie all that into what's happening with DSHEA reform?
Well, I would say with regard to DSHEA still works. The underlying values that it set up are still very much a part of the industry today. It's balancing consumer safety with consumer access. So, if you think about that Maren Morris song, the bones are good, right? The house is still good. But that doesn't mean that there are not things that after 30 years need to be updated. There are things around the edges that maybe are not working the way they were intended to, and they need to be addressed. And one of those, as you mentioned, is this idea called drug preclusion. It's a provision that was written into the original statute in the definition of what is a dietary supplement.
Let me ask the audience, how many of you have heard of the Drug Preclusion Act that is impacting products like NAC and NMN, just by show of hands?
Yeah,
okay, so you might want to discuss.
So this is a provision that says that if a drug is marketed first, or even if it's clinically studied in public investigations as a drug, that the drug side of the industry gets that article, that ingredient, and it cannot be commercialized as a supplement because it's basically a race to market. And we understand why it was written into the statute 30 years ago. They wanted to be sure that if drug companies spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars doing research around a particular ingredient, that the supplement industry can't come in at the last minute and market it as a supplement, and then none of that investment can be recouped. That was a worthwhile goal. But what we're seeing is it's being used now in ways that it was never intended. With N-acetylcysteine, with NAC, they went back and they found studies from the 1960s and said, well, we studied it in the 1960s, so therefore we should get a monopoly over the ingredient. Same thing with MNN. It was already approved or not objected to as a new dietary ingredient. It was in the market. And then FDA came back and said, oh, well, we found more research that we weren't aware of. So these are the kinds of things when we talk about DSHEA reform, these are the kinds of things that we need to do, is to go back and say, this is out of balance. Let's rewrite that provision in such a way that it still honors the original intent. We understand drug companies need to make their money back, but let's not let it be abusive of the supplement industry, and let's not let it take away our ability to innovate. So there are things that we can do with that. So for instance, the drug, for it to preclude a supplement, it would need to be in an oral dosage form, because supplements are oral dosage forms. If you're going to talk about the date on which the study was published, it needs to be a date that's public. It can't be a secret date when the investigational new drug was applied for. It has to be a date so that the supplement industry knows what they're working against. This study was published in June of 2011. So now we know if we were not in the market in June of 2011, that's the magic date. But the way it's being applied right now, it's sort of this double secret probation behind closed doors.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that we're working at. Obviously, the FDA has some things that they want to look at, and it's going to have to be a give and take. I mean, nobody's going to get everything they want in this modernization, and you might have to compromise and give some things you don't really want.
So on NAC, it's my understanding that you and the trade associations and the executives, really, we were able to get that back on the market. Is that correct?
Well, we got it back on the market,
but not
with
yet.
This sort of informal enforcement discretion.
Okay.
But it doesn't fix the larger problem.
All right.
And NMN is the example of why it didn't fix the problem. And who knows what the next one will be and the next one, because anytime there's a new hot ingredient, it's the potential that the drug side of the industry will try to lay claim to it and say, we studied it first.
Got it. We're going to run out of time, but I'll give you like one last shot. What should I have asked you that I didn't ask, and what do you want to leave the audience with? It's easier for me to promote your conference than you, but Steve has a big CRN annual event coming up in October 3rd, 4th, and 5th, right? Is that right?
Through the 6th.
Yes. In California, in Southern California. And this is a time when all the top supplement companies get together and the leaders are there. So that's an event that if you're interested in, you can see Steve right after this. But is there anything you want to part with that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah,
We have about one more minute left.
I would just leave with an optimistic kind of comment that I think sometimes people feel like Washington is moving on without them and there's nothing they can do. The industry really does have the ability to shape what goes on in Washington, both through their members of Congress and even at FDA, because the industry can exert a lot of pressure on the agency when we act collectively. And that's one of the things we really pride ourselves at CRN, is that we have relationships and we work to build strong connections with the agency. They know we don't agree with them all the time, but when we disagree, we're respectful. And when we agree with them, then we try to work with the agency and we try to collaborate where we can. So the industry has this ability to affect what goes on in Washington. Don't ever feel hopeless or feel like you can't change things, because you can.
Great. Well, let's give Steve a big hand for spending his time with us this morning. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Thanks a lot. I think Steve will be around. If you have any questions, he knows exactly what's going on behind the scenes in Washington. Thank you. Okay, so our last part of the program, I was going to talk a little bit about what happened at our summit this year, which happened in July. And sort of, it's a place where all the CEOs gather. We had about 400 executives there. And I thought I would just give you the highlights of the summit. And I'm going to go relatively quickly here because I want to get to of course, our last and most important speaker, Paul Stamets. At the summit, we try to bring leaders together to deal with some of the issues going on in the industry. We had our event in July of this year, 25th to 28th. It was, it was our 26th year that we've done the summit. It was an extension of all the readers of MBJ. This year, our theme was uncharted waters, the importance of agility and uncertainty and how you deal with those issues. And we had, again, as I said, about 428 CEOs and senior executives there, and about 26 speakers covering many topics. And we dealt with some of the issues that are going on in the world, that are impacting our industry, that are impacting our lives, right? Like the war in Ukraine and climate change and the discord in Washington and who's going to be the next president. Is it going to be Trump or is it going to be Biden? And we talked about all those, or maybe neither, which I would hope for. But sorry. So basically, we talked about those issues, and then we talked about the industry issues that are impacting us. You heard some from Steve a little bit just now. You heard some from the panel before, and we just dive into those issues and try to, solve them as an industry. And it's great because you have competitors there working collegially, working cooperatively, and we also have a lot of networking and a lot of deals are done there. So one thing I do there is I talk about what's happening in the press that's impacting us, and we've heard about some of this today, but what are some of the things that are going on out there that might be impacting our industry or maybe just impacting us? One of the things that happened this year was the fishing industry in Chile, which is where a lot of fish oil comes from, actually shut down early, possibly due to climate change, and that impacted the supply chain of fish oil. So if you're buying fish oil as a branded manufacturer, you're paying a lot more for it because of what happened there. And so I do think the climate will impact the supply chain and where herbs are grown, and certainly the war in Ukraine is impacting as many ingredients come from that part of the world. Then we also had things like the Ozempic thing, which you heard about, which could be an opportunity for us if we don't blow it. We've had the lawsuit, we talked about this NMN situation. There has been some rumors that if the FDA does not help us figure this out, that the industry might consider a lawsuit. I know that NPA, Dan Fabricant, is talking about that. I'm not sure it's always good to sue the government, but if that would get their attention, then sometimes that works. But we do have those folks fighting for us behind the scenes. And then we had an issue, one headline about melatonin being tested, and we always have this issue in the press, right? The press and lots of people don't like the supplement industry, so they find things that they can pick on it with, and then they come out, and sometimes they do testing on products, and they find stuff in those products where their product doesn't have those ingredients, and that's a problem for us. So we have to always be careful of the quality of our products, and what's on the bottle and what's on the label has to be in the product. And that's an issue that we continually try to work with. The other thing we covered at the summit was AI. How many of you have fooled around with ChatGPT? Look at that. How many of you how many of you brought ChatGPT to your work and you're actually doing your work with ChatGPT? Look at that. Okay. So I started to explore ChatGPT. We talked about AI and how it could be a positive force, but also has a dark side as well, and what's happening in the industry with AI. Peter Diamandis, one of our speakers from the summit, previously said, this was a quote that was most quoted after our summit 2 years ago, there will be two kinds of companies at the end of the decade, those who are fully utilizing AI and those who are out of business. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic statement. I don't know what you all think of AI, but he's one of the leading cutting leaders in this field, and he talks about how AI is going to change the world whether we like it or not. So at the summit we talked about the industry, where they're using AI in the industry. There's a company called Radical Science, which is here at the summit, the show this week, which is doing some AI work around clinical trials and being disruptive about how you do clinical trials. Very interesting AI platform. There was a company at the summit called Neuritas. Neuritas is a AI-produced peptide company, and they are using AI to produce peptides, which I think peptides is going to be an important part of our future if we can figure out how to get them to be regulated as supplements. So those are the areas that AI was working. Several companies are using AI. My final thoughts on AI is you should at least explore it. And you should know what it is and know how it could impact your company, your lives, yourselves, and our industry. The other topic we covered at the summit was mushrooms. And I'm going to talk about mushrooms just for a few minutes here as a good warm-up to our next speaker. And I didn't talk about mushrooms just because Paul's speaking, but I believe mushrooms are a big category that it's going to get bigger, and it's going to be a category that's going to help drive. In our industry, let's face it, we always look for what's like the next new thing. What's going to be the driver? What's going to be our fish oil from 10 years ago? What's going to be our next probiotic? What's going to be our next enzyme category? And we explored at the summit that mushrooms could be that category. It's not going to be a fad and go up and down. It's going to be a category that has science behind it, and that's going to be very powerful. I think you'll see a lot of mushroom products at the show today. How many of you are in the mushroom business by show of hands? I know that. Look at that. Okay. And sometimes you're adding a mushroom product to your line. Sometimes you're actually a full-bore mushroom company. Basically, we had a speaker there named Merlin Sheldrake, who was phenomenal, talked about the world of fungi, and you'll hear more about that world as well from our next speaker. And then there's this little topic called hallucinogenic mushrooms. How many of you have heard around the table talk of microdosing and psilocybin? How many of you are, I can't ask you if you're taking, sorry. Sorry. But this is a topic that we covered that's very controversial. I'm not saying psilocybin will ever necessarily be a supplement. I don't know. But I know that there's science behind it. Some people are equating it a little bit to what happened with CBD. It could be very powerful. And the smartest man in the world on psilocybin, in my opinion, you'll hear from shortly, Paul Stamets. So the trends we all know that are going on in the industry, you heard from Bill and Erica. But every year we sort of look at MBJ data and we say, what are the top 9 or 10 top trends? This is a slide you probably feel free to take a picture of it. But these are the key trends that are, like, for the last 3 years have been in the industry, and we sort of changed them. But if it's a trend, it's going to be around for 3 or 4 years. And we don't have time to talk about all of them, and I won't read it to you, but I'll just summarize it. We have brain health as a big trend, cognition. We've got immunity, still important after the pandemic, but there is talk of, viruses still out there, and talk of vaccine boosters and all that stuff. So we certainly need to understand the immunity system and how we can improve immunity, and what's immunity 2.0 look like? Is it going to be personalized? I'll come back to 3 in a sec. Sleep is a big category. We don't have a big brand yet in sleep, but lots of players are operating in the sleep area. Since the pandemic, sleep and mental illness has become a huge issue for people, and therefore a big opportunity for our industry. Beauty from within is another interesting trend that's happening. There's a company called Nutrafol, which appeared on the market, and they sold products through dermatologists for improving hair health and skin health. And you can ingest supplements to help your outside of your body, and the skin is the largest organ. So beauty from within is still a driving good growth category with collagen. Hemp, we talked about with Steve a little bit. It's a really messed up supply chain, and a lot of people have gone out of business, and it's a sad story. But cannabis, the cannabinoids still has good science behind it, the endocannabinoid system in the body. There's strong science behind that, and I do think CBD will be around if we can get some regulation. Pet nutrition, big area. People that take supplements for themselves want to give them to their pets. So pet nutrition is rapidly growing, because as people become older and baby boomers get older, they replace their kids with pets, and younger people are getting married later, so they get pets, and so the pet nutrition sector is just flying forward, and it's very hot. And people spend a lot of money on their pets. And then finally, personalized nutrition. You heard a little bit from Sherry about diagnosing and kind of getting an idea of what do you need as an individual for nutrition. My whole thing for the last 10 years is I can take 25 pills a day, but what do I really need for my body? And in order to understand that, you need to have a diagnostic test. So personalization is getting easier. There are apps now where you can look at your phone. You can actually plug something into your phone and get your EKG. You can eventually, I believe, you'll be able to put saliva on your phone and get your, complete DNA, so that there's lots of things that are happening with mobile technology that it's making it easier to test to see what supplements that we need. And you'll see some of those companies here. And then finally, there's new access points for consumers accessing different ways to get this health. Since the pandemic, when we couldn't go to doctors, there's lots of telemedicine opportunities. There's lots of companies out there where you can go in, a company called LifeForce. You can go in there and you can pay $350. You'll get your blood work done. They'll tell you exactly what supplements you need, and then they'll sell you the supplements. So that's kind of where I think the future is on a lot of the trends. And let me talk about mushrooms just for, I have 1 minute left, so I got to do this quick. So we did a survey on mushrooms, and we did about 1,000 people, and we found out that a lot of people were purchasing in mushrooms. This is a general survey, but they didn't know a lot about them. So we did a little bit of an analysis on what does that universe look like of mushrooms. There are suppliers in this sector. There are brands in this sector. There are food and beverage brands. You've all heard of Forsymatic, and Rise is here, and Mudwater. Those are mushroom-based brands. And then you have these sort of fringe brands which are selling, supplements on the front of the website, and then you can go to the speakeasy part of the website and buy the psilocybin, which is concerning to many people, including me. And then you've got pharma companies in this sector. So there's, again, the next speaker is going to tell you all about mushrooms, but there's 9 species that are in the market. The market's growing. It's growing fast. This is MBJ's numbers, and I believe that they're going to be studying that market and showing that it's basically a hockey stick up. It's growing. Some companies in the mushroom sector are growing at 15, 20, 25%. And then there's a worldwide market for mushrooms. This is some research from Grandview that says it's like close to a $3.5 billion market if you look at the global market for mushrooms when they go into foods and beverage and everything else. So the awareness is big on mushrooms. It's maybe they don't solve all the problems, but there's a great movie called Fantastic Fungi that our next speaker is in. Highly recommend that. And you just do on Google, you search mushrooms, and it's all over the place. I don't want to end on a controversial note, but in the mushroom category, you have fruiting bodies and you have mycelium, and they both are valid mushroom products. There's a little bit, unfortunately, a debate going on with a lot of confusion. So I just spoke to Paul backstage and said, maybe could he enlighten us, because I believe him that he has the right framework of what's happening there. From an industry standpoint, I think it's crazy that we have fruiting body people telling you that their mushrooms are better than mycelium, mycelium is better. I think they both work, and they both are mushrooms. I'm not a scientist, but I believe it's crazy when the industry fights with each other when we have such a big category. So that's all I'm going to talk about today from the summit. And I'm going to move to the next part of our program, which is the funnest part for me, which is to announce our next speaker, and also the fact that he's won a very special award. So we'll just take a few minutes. Jen, should I start? Oh, I forgot. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Jen, who keeps me on straight here. I do want to recognize our sponsor again, because we could not do this without our sponsor. So Spins was our sponsor, and we have the opportunity to hear from Jess Lavelle, who's the VP at Spins. She's a VP of Customer Success. She's going to come up and say a few words. Let's give her a big hand, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Managed to get up the stairs without falling over, so that's a win for today. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us here at Natural Products Expo East. And we are very proud to be the platinum sponsors for this expo, and also be sponsoring the Supplements Symposium this morning. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about Spins and what Spins is, and how we are empowering the industry with wellness-focused data technologies. My colleague Scott, you heard from him earlier this morning, and he really summed it up for me in a conversation we had a couple of days ago. And basically what he said is, if you think of Spins, think of a bottle of vitamin C. There's not a single bottle of vitamin C that moves around the North American marketplace without being tracked by Spins. And that really is a great way for me to think about and explain what Spins does. So how do we do this? We do this in a couple of ways, but one of our main focus is partnering with exclusive retailers, like you heard from Vitamin Shop, and really harnessing their data, their point of sales data, and using that to provide insights and performance of what is happening in the market. We also partner with other VMS providers like GNC, and have expanded our data to include that e-commerce solution like Thrive and Amazon into our data set. So then the second thing we do, aside from the performance data that we collect, harmonize, and synthesize, is we overlay it with some codification that really focuses on the values-orientated consumer. This codification is our attributes. And these attributes are really what illuminate the trends and what is happening in the supplement marketplace. I love a good data point, so I got my little Post-it note with some data points of how Spins has really illuminated the supplements marketplace over the last 2 years. So since 2021, we've actually added 6 new categories to our data set specifically for supplements. We also further dissected those to 38 subcategories and released 68 attributes into that marketplace. In October, so in a couple of weeks, in our next data period release, we're actually going to launch another 12 supplement-focused attribution, and it's looking at things like sweetener and ingredients, and really helping our consumers in our markets know what to buy, when to buy, and how it's impacting them. So for brands, retailers, essentially what Spins does is help you place your products on shelf, help you succeed on that shelf, and innovate in the marketplace. If anybody needs to learn anything else about Spins or wants to chat to any of our colleagues, please come to our main booth. It's booth 1029, or you will see a bunch of us wearing these T-shirts. Any one of us can help you and answer any questions that you have with Spins. But thank you again for your time. Thanks, Tom. And I think we're ready to hand over.
With him or not? Photo? Okay. Thank you very much, Jess.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So at our summit this year, we always do a Lifetime Achievement Award. Many industries have it. You watch the Academy Awards and all the award ceremonies. And we started this back in 2002. And we've had many winners of this award. And it really is, we have many awards at the MBJ Summit, but this is the sort of the pinnacle of the award ceremony. And we have, the selection criteria for this award is pretty strict. You have to be in the industry for 30+ years. You have to have made major contributions to the industry. You have to have done that without just wanting profit and just making money. It's not about building a big company. It's about, yes, you could have built a big company, but did you give back to the industry? Did you give back to your colleagues? Did you give back to people? Did you share information? Basically, were you a good person, which is what our industry is all about, right? It's about giving, go giving. It's about winning and getting the products out, but it's about giving back as well. And it's about making a major impression on the industry. So we've had many winners over the years. I'll read a few of them just so you know how esteemed this award is. John Carlson from Carlson Labs, Tom Harkin, Senator Tom Harkin, Linda Kaler, the founder of Rainbow Light, Drake Sadler from Traditional Medicinals, Senator Orrin Hatch, Sandy Gooch from Gooch's Market. You've probably heard of that from the West Coast. She was one of the pioneers in our industry, and many more. And we also had this year at our summit, Ed Smith. How many of you know the company Herb Farm? It's a very famous, iconic company. Ed Smith won the Lifetime Achievement Award. So this year, we tried to have Paul Stamets come, but it's hard because he's on his island hunting for mushrooms in July, and you just can't wrench him off the island. So we were able to get him here to Philadelphia to give him the Lifetime Achievement Award early, because I didn't want to take the risk that I couldn't get him back in July, but he always has an open invitation. So with that, I'd like to introduce our Lifetime Achievement Awarder and just talk a little bit about his background. And then we have the beauty of having him come up and give a talk. And if you've never heard a talk from him, you're very, very lucky, and you're in for a treat. So with that, Paul began his background way back. He was born in the 50s, and then 70s, he got into mushrooms, basically from being, a love of outdoors, and sort of basically found his way to love this category, both from a botanical standpoint, and he just lives and breathes and eats mushrooms, right? Literally on all cases. He started his career way back and pretty much created the category. He did a lot of early research, a lot of work creating mushroom products. He founded a company called Fungi Perfecti, which is here at the show, which is one of the leading brands in the mushroom space. But he didn't stop there. He also went on and founded a pharmaceutical company called Mycomedica Life Sciences. And they raised a lot of money a couple of years ago, and they're moving down the psilocybin path to bring psilocybin as a product combined with supplements that will change people's lives forever with PTSD and mental health and neurological problems. So he's really, kind of walked the talk. He has a TED Talk called 6 Ways Mushrooms Can Save the World, that if you have not seen that, I highly recommend it. He's written many books called Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Help Save the World. He's shown in many of his talks how mushrooms can help the planet. They can help the planet live longer. We're all concerned about that. They can help people's lives. He's coached me on my interest in mushrooms. That's changed a lot of my life. So without further ado, I'd like to give you a big round of applause to our Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Paul Stamets. Come on up. Here we go.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the work you do, and for being a great guy and changing the world. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great honor.
Yeah.
I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you. So with that, enjoy Paul, and thank you for being here, and I think you'll love his talk. Thank you, Paul. I'll take that.
Thank you.
Look at that.
If you're wondering why Tom is talking so fast, and I will too, we have a marching band coming in at 10 o'clock, and apparently we can't slow them down. So I'm super honored to be here. I hope I expand your horizons of your imagination and give you also practical tools for you to improve your life and that of your children and your friends and your family. So my talk is going to be all-encompassing. I live, walk, and breathe and eat this subject literally every day. So I want to first give you my disclosures. I am the founder and sole owner of Fungi Perfecti, maker of host defense. I have 145 wonderful co-workers. I've co-founded a Mycomedica Life Sciences. It's on a pharma path for primarily focused on psilocybin and antivirals. We have a nonprofit called the Center for Ecological Consciousness. I have 7 books. I'm 208 pages into my next book on psilocybin, which should be out next year by Random House and Penguin. And I recently have received my second DEA license for possession of and study of psilocybin. I'd like to say I passed my background checks. Woohoo. But I'm so proud that Fungi Perfecti and Host Defense is a certified B Corp. And now we are climate positive, scope 1, 2, and 3. Now for you that don't know what scope 1, 2, and 3 means, scope 1 is your direct carbon emissions resulting from manufacturing. Scope 2 is indirect emissions in the form of energy, et cetera, heating your facilities. And scope 3 is the most comprehensive, upstream and downstream. We are returning 110%. We're climate positive, 10% more carbon is sequestered every single time a customer purchases a product. They're sequestering carbon. How many companies in this room are scope 3? How many companies in this room are scope 2? How many companies in this room are scope 1? This is extraordinary. I challenge this industry in 10 years for 50% of you to be scope 3 certified. It is time for you to give back to the commons and sequester carbon. It's important that we walk our talk as an industry and send a message and set a standard for the next generation. We're all on this Earth ship together, and we need to protect our climate and our ecosystems for future generations. I want to acknowledge some of my primary mentors, Dr. Daniel Stuntz, Kit Skates, Michael Bew, and Alexander Smith. I want to acknowledge my father, my brother John, and my mother, all whom have now passed on. These mentors in my life taught me some of the principles that I follow and espouse. My compass is governed by the principles of kindness, courage, strength, and wisdom. I take the Aikido approach when I face business opportunities and strategies. I feel it's so important for us to demonstrate these 4 principles because even though they do not teach you at Harvard Business School, the return on investment on being kind to other people is reciprocated many, many times over. So in this industry, cooperation is so much more important than competition. So let's talk about the role of mycelium and mushrooms in the ecosystem. Mushroom and mycelium infuse all habitats. Now there's been really a false controversy about labeling mushroom products. In the field of mycology, we say mushroom spores. In the field of science, we say mushroom spores. If we didn't say mushrooms before spores, there could be algae spores. There could be bacterial spores. There could be lungwort spores. With mycelium, if you use mushrooms, there could be mold mycelium. It is a false narrative, a false argument that is frankly perplexing to us scientists why this issue is even being elevated. It's similar with plants. Plant seeds, plant leaves, plant stems, plant roots. Of course you would have the qualifier before spores or mycelium, otherwise you create greater confusion. So this is what mycelium is. It comes from a mushroom. Mushrooms make mycelium, mycelium makes mushrooms. And the mycelial networks have the enormous genetic potential for adapting to ecological change or challenges. The mushroom mycelium produces mushrooms. Depending on the substrate, influences the morphology of the mushrooms. But here's really the take-home slide, and you're welcome to photograph this. Many more genes are expressed at the mycelial state than the fruit body state. Why is that? Well, the mycelium is navigating through a hostile microbial environment, trying to be parasitized by other aggressive organisms. It upregulates immune factors to defend itself from parasitization. So the mycelium, as a general statement, codes for a lot more genes than the fruit body. Actually, mushrooms rot quickly. The mycelium has an immune system that lasts for weeks, months, years, and fleshy mushrooms come up and rot in a matter of 4 or 5 days. They don't have a good immune system. The mycelium is the immune system of the organism. So looking at some of the literature that's been published, especially with lion's mane, it's the mycelium that has the most neurogenic properties. There's multiple clinical studies showing that the mycelium codes for compounds that cause neurogrowth factors that cause neurons to repair, regenerate, and regrow. This is a very, I think, illustrative example. That is a reishi mushroom on the right. You peel off the cap cuticle, what is there is mycelium. So the mycelium is compressed into the form of a mushroom, but the mushroom is mycelium. But the mycelium we can scale. It has much more genes being activated. At the end of its life cycle, it compresses into the structure of a fruit body that releases spores. So we've been studying this subject for a long time. One of the subjects that I'm focused on, because I'm a beekeeper and I'm a mycologist, and I have beehives, and I had this epiphany that mushroom mycelium can help bees fight viruses. Colony collapse has swept the world, as many of you know. It's up to 50% loss of beehives, of Apis mellifera, the honeybee. We published this in Nature. One treatment of mushroom mycelium extracts of reishi mushrooms and amadou, which my hat is made of, reduces bee viruses, the deformed wing virus, by more than 879 times, the Lake Sinai virus of reishi more than 45,000 times. One treatment 12 days later with a mushroom mycelium extract put into sugar water. This article in Nature is in the top 0.1% of all articles ever published in the Nature publication ecosystem. Nature Medicine, Nature Physics, etc. Why? It's the first demonstration that a natural product can be more powerful than a pharmaceutical. We think it because of the entourage effect of upregulating the immunity, so the endogenous immune system of the organism, bees, can be able to limit these viruses. This is a randomized clinical animal study done outdoors with beehives. But let's go back in time. The use of mushrooms goes back thousands of years, both in Europe and in China. Hippocrates first mentioned amadou mushrooms. My hat is made of an amadou mushroom as an anti-inflammatory, 400 plus BCE. Dioscorides mentioned agarikon. Another mushroom we have spent an enormous amount of energy and focus is a mushroom that grows exclusively in the old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest and now in some sky islands in Europe. Less than 1% of those forests currently exist today. So not only the Greeks recognized this mushroom as being a strong medicinal mushroom, but the Haida people and the First Nations of the Pacific Northwest also recognized it as being a very important mushroom. And they carved the mushroom into little grave guardian figures that would help shamans go into the afterlife. Where does the agarikon grow? It grows in these habitats. I propose to you that the old growth forests are genomic libraries of the enormous potential consequence and benefit for human immunity. It's sometimes very difficult to find these strains of agarikon. They can be hundreds of feet up into old growth trees. We have to climb them. And many of these forests are being cut, now burned. The loss of habitat is we're losing these genomic libraries of agarikon. Agarikon has been positioned as one of the longest living mushrooms in the world. The center photograph you see there is a mushroom that's approaching 100 years of age. The tree on the left is the largest spruce in Canada. There's an agarikon about 2/3 up that tree. And there's a photograph of me from 1997, 1998, it just gives you an idea how long I've been collecting agarikon. In fact, we now are creating the largest library of agarikon in the world. And we take a small piece of tissue, we leave the agarikon mushrooms in the forest unless it's going to be logged or threatened by fire, or the habitat's going to be destroyed for other reasons. Otherwise, we leave these intact. To harvest agarikon for medicinal purposes would be devastating against the genomic preservation of the species. By taking tissue cultures of mycelium, we can grow the mycelium while protecting the mushroom by leaving it there. So the agarikon mycelium that we have now 93 strains of agarikon, approaching 100. Only one time out of 40 or 50 times in the old growth forest we will find these. So our genomic library, when we hit 100 strains, we're doing full genomic sequencing, and we're populating a public database because we have the largest collection of agarikon by far in the world. Tens of thousands of hours, no exaggeration, it has taken for us to invest to find these rare strains and to bank them, because many of the strains we have banked today, the forest no longer exists. Those phenotypes, those strains have become extinct, had it not for us being able to get them in culture. Agarikon is now on the red list of threatened species in Europe. And even though this distribution may seem like it's been widely distributed, it once was. But now, if we populated that map with locations, you'd see small little dots throughout those countries. This species is becoming increasingly rare. Less than 50% sightings in the past 10 to 20 years. It's on the rapid descension to near extinction. The other focus of my life has been with psilocybin mushrooms. I would just leave you the caveat, you'll be hearing a lot about agarikon in the near future. The other species that I've focused on a lot, as Tom mentioned, is psilocybin. I produced my first book on psilocybin mushrooms 45 years ago. When I was 23 years of age, I published my first field guide to psilocybin mushrooms. We started doing a series of conferences because at that time at the Evergreen State College, I was covered by a DEA license by Dr. Michael Bugh and listed on the license. We could do these conferences and I could legally possess psilocybin, which is known as a Schedule I drug. So at a time of high paranoia, we would do these conferences because I had the umbrella, legal umbrella, to possess psilocybin mushrooms. We could feel like we could promote the education and identification of psilocybin mushrooms, which very little people knew about at the time. Terence McKenna, many of you know of Terence, wrote a book called Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide with 3 other authors. It became a very popular book. I have 7 books out, but Terence's book, by far, the book on the right there, really swept the world because it showed people how to grow psilocybin mushrooms at home. We started doing a number of other conferences, and it's because I knew the scientists and the psychedelic experts, but I was also good friends with Ken Kesey, the Grateful Dead, and their merry pranksters. So I realized I had this intersection of these cultural heroes and also these scientists, so we brought them together through this amazing mushroom conference in 1999, the Millennium Mushroom Conference. So how many species of psilocybin mushrooms have been identified so far? More than 141 species of psilocybin mushrooms, circumpolar, over 5,600 collections since the 1800s. This is really important that people understand. This is very different than peyote. Psilocybin mushrooms are diverse. They grow all over the world. They don't grow in the old growth forest, except for 1 or 2 species. They seem to be associated with human migration and human activity. I have been able to publish 4 new species of psilocybin mushrooms, and a few months ago, I have a new psilocybin mushroom species named after me called Psilocybis stomacii, which in the field of mycology is a big deal, okay? it's such a cute little mushroom too. It's got this little wavy nipple at the top, which I like. So there's no doubt that we all came from Africa. And 15 to 20,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, humans, colonized the Americas. Now, colonization is a very pejorative term these days, but from a scientist's point of view, migration of species colonizes new habitats. The majority of plants in your garden, your grasses, they're not native to North America. They were imported. So with the migration of humans carries knowledge and practices. You meet friend or foe on the trail, on the path. You share with them the tools that can help them be better and stronger and better survive. So let's look at some of the historical echoes in the archaeological record suggesting the use of psilocybin mushrooms. The famous Tassili cave art in northern Africa, southern in southern Algeria, 7,000 years before present. Then there's a cave art in Spain that also is associated with cattle that has mushrooms showing up in the bottom of this pictograph. And then in Greek culture, the Eleusinian mysteries speak of Demeter giving Persephone a mushroom before she goes into the underworld. And this also illustrates the origination myth of the seasons in Greek culture. So recently, I went to Egypt, and we visited 10 temples. While everyone else is looking at the great pictographs of its temples, etc., I went mushroom hunting. So we went to 10 temples. At every single temple, we found mushroom hieroglyphics. And I want to give credit to my friend here, Azim. He is the first one who published this in 2016, that the Egyptians likely used psilocybin mushrooms. And this is the temple Dendera, which is one of the driest regions of the world today because of climate change. And so Hathor, who's the goddess of cosmetics, of beauty, also the goddess of cows, interestingly, she's associated with a mushroom, and the mushroom is classically has the phenotype, the appearance of Psilocybe cubensis. Now you look down below, and there is another mushroom that is associated with the blue lotus. The blue lotus is considered to be sacred in Egyptian culture, and the color is gold and blue. And here you see falcons sitting upon the mushrooms, which signifies spirit going into the afterlife. And we found pictographs throughout the temples. Several thousand years ago, the Nile Delta region was moist, had deciduous trees, alluvial plains. It was rich. Climate change now, when we went along the Nile, literally between this stage and the street outside, it was desert. Such a thin band of vegetation now surrounds the Nile. So we didn't find 1 or 2 or 3 hieroglyphics. We found dozens. Showing this to one Egyptologist, he goes, "No, those are shovels." They're not shovels, folks. These are mushrooms. And it speaks to the fact that when you have experts not skilled in one field, they can't see that which is hiding in plain sight. In fact, it's not hiding, it's apparent. The reason why I think this is highly significant is because the mushrooms of Psilocybe cubensis are golden in color and they turn blue. So this golden blue predominance in Egyptology, I think, speaks to the fact that more than one thing can be true. The blue lotus is a water lily. Cattle go to the ponds to drink. This mushroom is quite substantial. It's a very large mushroom. Obviously, the Egyptians collecting water lilies, the blue lotus, would encounter Psilocybe cubensis. Mushrooms were banned by Egyptian royalty to be picked by the peasants, by the commoners. But more interestingly also is Cleopatra was a lover of Caesar's and Mark Antony. Now, Mark Antony was 20 years younger than Caesar, but Cleopatra funded the Roman army at a time when they did not have enough in their treasury. So you're there with your lover, the highest ranks of society. Wouldn't you share the Eleusinian mysteries if you're coming from that culture? Wouldn't you share the activity of the Blue Lotus combined with Psilocybe cubensis? Of course you would. So look how close these regions were, or are today. The Sicily cave art in Algeria, the Spanish cave art that I showed you, the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece and in Egypt. There was a lot of cross-cultural communication. Now, at the time of the Eleusinian mysteries, 2,000 years ago, they persisted for almost 1,500 years. Sophocles, Aristotle, Plato all partook of the Eleusinian mysteries, which involved eating or drinking a mushroom or a fungus concoction that sent them into a spiritual state of being. On the other side of the planet, in the New World, the Aztecs also were recorded by the Spaniards of ingesting psilocybin mushrooms. They combined it with honey and chocolate. And interesting to me is the Bavarian Beer Act in Europe, about the same time, banned mushrooms from beer. When you put mushrooms in honey to preserve it, as is commonly practiced even today, you create a mushroom mead, a psychoactive beer. So it's really extraordinary to me on two sides of the world, relatively at the same time, we have documentation of mushrooms being used as inebriants for spiritual purposes. But we must give credit to Maria Sabina, the great Mazatec shaman who opened up her home and showed R. Gordon and Valentina Wasson, some of the secrets of the Mazatec culture using psilocybin mushrooms. This was published in Life magazine, May 13th, 1957. And also, Tina Wasson also published it about simultaneously in a Utah magazine. But R. Gordon Wasson was not a mycologist. Tina Wasson was. She knew the mushrooms by Latin binomials. She knew how to identify them. Well, Maria Sabina also was a mycologist. These two great women opened up the doors for many of us that now are standing on their shoulders of knowledge. Psilocybe cubensis came from Africa, and it looks like it appeared in the Americas with the arrival of the Spanish and the conquistadors. Now there is unfortunately, people not really knowledgeable about this subject who politicize and create divides and controversies that don't need to exist. Maria Sabina used three species primarily: Psilocybe cerulescens, Psilocybe aztecorum, and Psilocybe mexicana. She did not use Psilocybe cubensis. It was called San Isidro, the saint of the fields in Catholicism. And they disdained Psilocybe cubensis because it was associated with the Spanish. What has happened now, because of the surge in interest in psilocybin mushrooms, the Mazatecs cannot collect wild psilocybin mushrooms in their habitats. So what are they using? They're using Psilocybe cubensis. They're using a mushroom associated with the migration, the colonization of Spanish coming to the Americas. It's now become sustainable for their Mazatec practices that they have a sustainable supply of psilocybin mushrooms because Psilocybe cubensis can be grown and cultivated. Those other three species I mentioned are very difficult to cultivate. So I want to bring you to an essential concept of building bridges, not divides. And I want to give credit to Albert Marshall, who came up with the phrase of two-eyed seeing. When challenged by a mother who said to Albert, "Why should I send my indigenous children to a school that teaches Western education?" Albert said, "Because we need two-eyed seeing. One eye informed with indigenous wisdom, the other eye informed with Western technology." Growing Psilocybe cubensis for the Mazatecs and making it available to them for their indigenous practices is an example of two-eyed seeing. Moreover, my friend Melissa Nelson, some of you know her, she runs the Conservancy Seed Exchange in Sebastopol, California. She's half Irish and half Chippewa. Many indigenous people are mixed blood. They're not going to deny their heritage. But she came up with a phrase of re-indigenization. How many threads of knowledge have been broken over time because of disease, famine, religious domination, climate change? It's amazing we have this knowledge today. So re-indigenization is to be able to empower indigenous peoples and their practices by offering them psilocybin mushroom in this case that can help them continue. And indigenous traditions are never static. They're constantly improving and changing. I was in Anchorage, Alaska. I went to the most impressive indigenous museum I've been at, First Peoples. It was fantastic. And at the very end of the exhibit, with the Inuits, they were hunting seals. And the last photograph was on a snowmobile with binoculars and a rifle. Those are Western technologies. It's an example, again, of two-eyed seeing. So a lot of my indigenous elder friends, we're a voice now for building of bridges across indigenous cultures, only if they ask, and we respect their traditions, can we help offer them sustainable solutions so they can continue. This is so important for all of us. We need to build bridges, not divisions. So many states now are decriminalizing or legalizing psilocybin. California, many of you heard, 42-11 in the legislature approved the decriminalization and legal possession of psilocybin up to 1 ounce. Of course, you've heard about Oregon and Colorado. This is sweeping not only the United States and Canada, sweeping the world right now. And there's very good reasons for this. There was first a series of meta-studies that came out, in this case prisoners, 485,000 prisoners surveyed. Statistically significant association with the one psilocybin experience and a decreased odds of larceny, property crime, and violent crime. Oh, you can say, well, association is not causation, but it can be. So that's an interesting data point. It's a meta-analysis, observational study, retroactive. Another study comes out, 1,266 community members. Psilocybin and LSD were statistically associated with a decrease in partner-to-partner violence. Think of that. I always thought if there's a dating app, have you tripped on psilocybin? Yes. Oh, okay. Move forward. If you haven't, well, more dangerous people. Stay away from them. So then opioid use disorder. Also, psilocybin is the only psychedelic associated with lower odds of opioid use disorder. How many people in this room have family, friends, or neighbors that have been affected by opioid use? Could you raise your hand? It's the majority of us. It's affected me and my family. You don't want to talk about bad news to your friends, your family. But if someone does psilocybin and suddenly breaks their addiction to opioids, it does become newsworthy. You want to spread good news. People fundamentally change. Nature relatedness. Another observational study. Those who've had one experience with psilocybin tend to be more aware of the environment, more pro-ecological. As of yesterday, there's 130 clinical trials in psilocybin registered at clinicaltrials.gov. 10 years ago, there was one. Harvard, Stanford, the best universities across the world, they're going past IRB boards and institutional review boards. They're being vetted by scientists They're addressing a critical need that other medicines are not addressing. So this is extraordinary that so many scientists, because every one of these studies has a panel of physicians and researchers that are vetting their research to make sure harm is minimized, addressing a critical need, high probability of a substantial improvement. But the clinical trials with psilocybin have a really hard problem when you put it into the placebo double-blind controlled model, which is the gold standard for doing clinical trials. And I cannot illustrate this better than this cartoon. 2 different patient cohorts. One group got the placebo, and the other group did not. So the placebo is not supposed to be detectable by the patient population. And of course, in 20 minutes, for those of you who have not done psilocybin, you have liftoff, you clearly know that you've got the active ingredient. Well, psilocybin is known to increase neuroplasticity and homological crosstalk between neural networks. And this is what's so exciting for a neuroscientist, is looking at how psilocybin can lead to neurogenesis to fight neurodegenerative diseases. So there are several double-blind, placebo-controlled studies for depression. The verdict is out, folks. We don't need any more psilocybin studies on depression. It is in the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine. These studies are very, very compelling, that it shows that psilocybin can treat PTSD and depression and relieve anxiety. And during this COVID crisis, you can imagine, those factors have substantially increased across the general population. So let's look at some of the addictive substances that psilocybin has been studied for. Long-term follow-up of using psilocybin for ceasing tobacco smoking. 2 sessions, several weeks apart, 67% of the people 1 year later were not smoking cigarettes. Think of that. You've been smoking cigarettes most of your adult life, you're addicted, nothing has worked. 1 6-hour experience, maybe 2, followed by therapy. And the common refrain by the patients is they look at the cigarettes and they go, I don't need those. Why am I smoking them? And they cold turkey stop smoking cigarettes within a week. One of the most addictive substances known. Binge drinking. Also, statistically significant reduction in binge drinking. Double-blind, placebo-controlled. There are many other studies of those 130 studies that I showed at clinicaltrials.gov, and there are recruitments going on for many of these clinical studies today. So many of you may know someone who's addicted to alcohol, cigarettes, and other substances, opioids. Go to clinicaltrials.gov and see if they're enlisting. They need to have the patients enrolled that under strict criteria so they can further refine these studies. So I want to talk about microdosing. Now, psilocybin commences at 1%, has about 10 milligrams of psilocybin. A microdose is 1/10 of a liftoff dose, of a perceptual dose. So 10 milligrams is a liftoff dose, so a microdose is 1 milligram. About 1/10 of a gram of psilocybe cubensis. I'll say that again. 1 gram of psilocybe cubensis is 10 milligrams. 1/10 of a gram of psilocybe cubensis is 1 milligram. I describe microdosing as non-intoxicating. Some people said perceptual, but when I microdose, I feel happier, color's a little brighter, I'm in a better mood, I'm more tolerant, so it's perceptual. But it's not intoxicating. It's not like you slammed a beer and you got a little buzz rise for an hour. Microdosing has no perceptual intoxication. So we started doing some surveys, and we enlisted a group called Counterfeit Citizen in Vancouver, British Columbia. And we came out with an app to measure what the behavior is of people microdosing. And you see in the 1/10 to 1/3 of a gram, 88% of the people microdosing were in that range. Now, I suggested something of stacking psilocybin microdosing with lion's mane mycelium. The idea was psilocybin, I believe, back in 2000, the mid-2000s, causes neurogenesis. But psilocybin is a vasoconstrictor. Niacin is a vasodilator. And then lion's mane regrows the myelin sheath on the axons of the nerves. So I thought the combination of psilocybin microdosing with lion's mane and niacin could have an entourage effect in increasing neurogenesis and performance. Neuropathies oftentimes present themselves as a constriction of the vascular system and a deadening of the nerves at the fingertips and the toes. So I thought by adding niacin, its flushing form, it excites the nervous system. As all of you know, it itches. At high doses, over 50 milligrams, you flush red. It's a vasodilator. So the idea is to have vasodilations of the endpoints of the vascular nervous system to deliver the neurogenic benefits of psilocybin and lion's mane. So we conducted the largest global microdosing study in the world. We have over 25,000 people currently reporting. And this microdosing study has all been vetted. It's anonymized. You own your own data. You code in. It's gone through ethics review by medical institutions. Ask you how much you're microdosing with. What are you combining it with? Are you combining it with lion's mane, niacin, or chocolate, or other substances? And then it has challenge tests, cognitive tests, memory, performance, sight, vision, standard tests that are associated with age-related neurodegeneration. And so I popularized this formula, and I called it the Stamina Stack. And I called it the Stamina Stack because I got so tired of people ripping off my ideas, claiming it as their own, and popularizing it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to brand this thing. I'll just call it the Stamina Stack. So here is the Stamina Stack. You're welcome to take a photograph of it. The niacin amount is just sub-threshold for flushing. Some people like the niacin flush, but most people do not. So there is a 10th to a 20th gram of psilocybin cubensis, lion's mane mycelium, not the fruit bodies. The mycelium contains arenaceins that promote nerve growth factors. And it turns out that those people who stacked, and this cohort was about 4,500 people, were 4,500 people were non-stackers, 4,200 people were stackers. Now, the amazing thing about the microdose study is that we had more non-microdosers than we had microdosers. So the journal editors at Nature liked this because the two populations were very well weighted in their analysis. So we published our first paper, also in Nature, Scientific Reports, this time 3,486 reporters, and 28%, 264 people were using the Stamina Stack who are microdosing. So that was interesting. The stack became so popular, and we found very strong signal of reducing depression and anxiety with the people who are doing the Stamina Stack and with also microdosers. The data is very similar. Data from more than 8,000 participants. But we came under scrutiny and criticism, and I understand this. Well, you're interpreting an emotional state by microdosing, which is subjective. Well, that's what the clinical studies were doing also, by the way. But how do you know it's not a community response? Because you joined a community of individuals. I'm microdosing, you're microdosing, we're all microdosing. We have a community, we feel better, don't we? So yeah, it's very interpreted. So I asked, don't we have a metric in our microdose.me app that's beyond subjectivity, that actually shows a performance enhancement? And our statistician said, yes, we do. And so we dug into what's called the finger tapping test. Many of you have had this if you have traumatic brain injury, relatives Alzheimer's or dementia, how many times you can tap your 2 fingers in 10 seconds. It's a psychomotor test. 100 articles plus on basically the tap test. You can tap a lot faster when you're 22 than you're 82. Same with playing the piano, the guitar, etc. And so when we disambiguated the stamina stackers from the microdosers or non-microdosers without the stamina stack, we found an extraordinary signal. And we also published this in Nature. What we found in the 55-plus-year-olds, the tapping frequency of psychomotor performance went from 48 taps to 68 taps in 30 days. That's not subjective. That's not an emotional state. This is a performance enhancement. Think of the implications of how many elderly people fall, break their hip, go to the hospital, get an infection, die. Think of all the people trying to teach the younger generation how to play the piano or a guitar. Think about older people trying to code with their fingers. 6 regions of the brain at least are involved in performing a tap test. Ideation, looking at it, performance, touch sequence, cadence, that whole entire response. So we got really excited by this data. And now we've been able to locate neuroreceptors, and we found the entourage effect of these ingredients is greater than the cumulative addition of the 3 components by itself, causing synergy. I think we have come up with a breakthrough. All of us suffer from neurodegeneration. It's an age-related phenomenon. This could have the universality of use to improve psychomotor performance across all of your activities a day. What activity are you not involved in the psychomotor performance? So I postulated this would be activating a receptor site called TrkB. TrkB is a neuroreceptor that codes for BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors. I postulated this about 7 or 8 years ago. I was so excited when an article in Cell that came out, authored by I think more than 20 scientists, found that SSRIs and antidepressants work because they bind with the TrkB neuroreceptor. That's the reason why they work. And this past year, another article came out with a lot of other co-authors saying that psilocybin binds to that neuroreceptor 1,000 times more than antidepressants. 1,000 times more. That's a macrodose, 1,000 times more than an antidepressant. Where's a microdose? It's somewhere on that slope now, isn't it? It's going to be more than 1. This is the biggest threat to big pharma, is the use of psilocybin mushrooms for microdosing for depression. This is a paradigm-shifting potential breakthrough, not only for microdosing for depression, but using the stamina stack for coordination. So my bottom line theory is niacin is a catalyst for psilocybin. It aids vascular delivery. Lower doses of psilocybin and tryptamines can be used, augmented by niacin and lion's mane. And the entourage effect allows for the psychomotor performance. I filed a patent on July 23rd, 2016. 6 patents have been issued in the past year on this data. Some of you know about patents. There are method patents. And a method patent does not give you much protection. A method patent for an iPhone, you can't see the way it was made in a private factory. My patents are blends of composition of matter patents, where then the iPhone is proof of the patent. So Mycomedica, I love it because Tom showed all those companies involved in the psilocybin space. We're never mentioned. We have been under the radar. We raised $60 million. We still have $53 million in the bank. The psilocybin industry has been boom and bust, as many of you know. So many companies start up and then failed. And we've just taken the Aikido approach, remaining in stealth mode. Our patent portfolio, as of yesterday, increased to 9 patents. We're coming out of stealth mode. We have several clinical studies planned for 2024. I think we're at a cusp of a medical breakthrough in psychiatry and neurology. A popular way of making these microdoses of chocolate, we learned this from the Aztecs. Now, even though I have a DEA license, I live mostly in Canada on a remote island in Desolation Sound, British Columbia. Under physician's supervision, legally, I consume psilocybin mushrooms about twice a year. And I was with my physician attendant, and I'm eating psilocybe cubensis, and I start gagging. And she was like, "You're a psilocybin expert." I go, "These are terrible. I hate the taste of these." But you put it with chocolate, and they're delectable. So thanks to the Aztecs, two-eyed seeing. Thank you, Aztecs, for teaching us that psilocybin mushrooms are much better when you combine it with chocolate. So I think the Stammet stack can increase neurological health of the peripheral and central nervous system throughout the entire body. How many Einsteins are we losing? All these references that I mentioned is on an unbranded website that I've constructed with my team at mushroomreferences.com. There's no advertisements, just for scientists, just for researchers. Hundreds of articles on mycelium showing that it's active and has properties that are beneficial. It's more than 1,000 pages long, I think now. We populate it about once a month, repopulate it. How many Einsteins are we losing? And our elders that need to pass the torch of knowledge to the next generation. This is critical for the body, intellect of our society. Macrodosing with therapy is absolutely essential. My father, at the end of his life, asked me for psilocybin mushrooms. I turned him down. Alexander Smith, that I showed you at the beginning of my talk, the father of American mycology, who published a monograph on the genus psilocybe, never ate the psilocybin mushrooms himself. In Aspen, Colorado, where he had a house, he invited me over for a private conversation with his wife. And he says, "Paul, I respect you. I want to do psilocybin mushrooms with you. I'm 24 years of age." I asked both Alexander Smith, my father, the same question. Helen and Mona, their wives, will you also ingest psilocybin mushrooms with us? And they both said no. And I gave them the same answer. I cannot take the responsibility of giving you a high dose of psilocybin mushrooms, and the next day that I leave, I'll be abandoning you. You could have a life-changing experience, and you to reconcile that it challenges everything that you previously believed in. I feel a deep responsibility for that. So long ago, I adopted the mantra, nature provides, I don't. That's probably why I passed my DEA background check. I've been very strict about this. Those of you who convey psilocybin mushrooms to other people, you have a moral responsibility to be skilled, to be with them subsequent to the experience. There are skilled therapists. CIIS, the California Institute for Integrative Studies, is graduating thousands of therapists now. They can be contacted for local therapists in your area. I'm advocating you only do this legally, where it's legally available. But there's a sea change here, folks. This is a revolution for the freedom of consciousness. The ballot measures are overwhelmingly positive, and the politicians, left and right, conservatives and liberals, are coming together advocating the use of psychedelics and psilocybin for veterans and for PTSD. This also is an example of two-eyed seeing. I may be left of the center in my political and environmental beliefs, but from my many years of being involved in ecological societies, I've met some great conservatives who are fast, true friends of mine. And I've come to realize those of us who are liberal, we push the envelope of change. We're risk takers. 95% of the time we'll fail. At 5% of the time, maybe 1% of the time, we'll innovate and create an invention that'll help the commons. And then conservatives don't want to risk change. They want to then keep things stable. I come from a family of wheat farmers. They dare not change their practices. They want to stay with the tried and true methods. So it's interesting that the innovators out of left field bring into the commons something that conservatives then later protect. We need conservatives and liberals to work together. We need different cultures to work together. We need two-eyed seeing. I believe psilocybin increases neurogenesis. I believe psilocybin reduces violence, crime, recidivism. The return on the investment to society can be calculated in the billions of dollars by reducing the number of people going into prison, reducing the stress on the court system, reducing the collateral damage of an opioid addict breaking into your home and stealing things or causing violence to supply their addiction. I have a family member who spent 3 years in prison because of opioid use. I did not understand him. He was suffering real pain. Those of you who are not experienced with these addicts, they are experiencing pain. Their endogenous dopamine receptors are not activated normally. They need the medicine to suppress their pain. Without it, they experience severe pain. This is something now like a pebble in the pond of good news. When you can break these addictive behaviors, become less violent, a better citizen, less prone to breaking the laws, compassionate, reaching the hand out to help your neighbors, a core Christian belief and a belief with many religions, Judaism, Islamic traditions, all of these. Do unto each other that which you want to be done to yourselves. This is a paradigm-shifting medicine at a time critical that we need to come together. I believe psilocybin makes nicer people. And we are at a critical junction in time. We're at the tipping point. Unless we can unify and come together as a community, we cannot address the challenges that we're not on the near event horizon, they're happening now. But the community, the body intellect that we can protect and preserve and demonstrate, I think can create the paradigm shift. Listening to our ancestors and listening to future generations, calling back to us. This is our moment in time. This is our responsibility. So as a community, the natural products industry does not create a circular firing squad shooting at each other, inventing false narratives. This is time to us to come together in collaboration and unity and polite, respectful competition. We can do this together. I believe the natural products industry can lead the charge of this paradigm shift and the revolution and freedom of consciousness. Thank you very much.
Let's have a big hand. If that doesn't deserve a standing ovation, I don't know what does. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Changing the world.
beat the band.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I really appreciate all your time today. We're out of time. Enjoy the show. There's State of the Natural Products Industries tomorrow at 8:30 at the Innovation Room. I would like to thank Jessica Rubino and Jen Taylor for all the work they did to put this together. And thank you all for being here. And thank you, Paul, again for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Canopy is Zipline Logistics shipper intelligence platform. So what that means is we give you the tools to track your shipments in real time. We give you the ability to look at all of the historical information about your loads and review KPIs about their performance.
Canopy was built first and foremost to be a Goldilocks TMS. It was entirely crafted through the lens of consumer goods and retail. So things like measuring must arrive by date performance and OTIF performance, and helping shippers understand, not just from a retailer to retailer perspective, but from a retail location by retail location perspective, where their profitability lies, where their cost bases lie.
All of our customers get access to Canopy for free, which is truly an incredible service that we're able to offer our customers.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We've already come a long way, but we've got further to go. And together, there's no telling where we can go. Because one voice can sing a note, but many create harmony. When humanity comes together, amazing things happen. And we think the time for us to come together is right now. Coming in 2024, an all-new, one-of-its-kind immersive event experience like you've never imagined, where we will touch, see, and feel the innovations that are shaping tomorrow's CPG landscape. Where change makers and visionaries from all corners of the world will come together to rewrite the future of our industry and our planet, to co-create the world we want and that humanity deserves. Join us at the destination where conscious products grow. Newtopia now. Launching in Savannah, Georgia, August 2024.
Canopy is Zipline Logistics shipper intelligence platform. So what that means is we give you the tools to track your shipments in real time. We give you the ability to look at all of the historical information about your loads and review KPIs about their performance.
Canopy was built first and foremost to be a Goldilocks TMS. It was entirely crafted through the lens of consumer goods and retail. So, things like measuring must arrive by date performance and OTIF performance, and helping shippers understand, not just from a retailer to retailer perspective, but from a retail location by retail location perspective, where their profitability lies, where their cost bases lie.
All of our customers get access to Canopy for free, which is truly an incredible service that we're able to offer our customers.